Today's gathering is on the traditional territory of the Comox First Nation, unceded, untreated territory. We're all guests here as a result of the generosity of the First Nations people, and we're very grateful for the support, hospitality, friendship, and partnership that our community has with the Comox First Nation, and we're very grateful for that relationship. Today's program features four fabulous Canadians. Maud Barlow is with us, Andrew Nikiforik is with us, Jessica Ernst is with us, Ingmar Lee is with us, and we're going to spend the morning following up on last night's presentation regarding what we're now encouraging everyone to call the liquefied fracked gas industry. Time for us to change that language a little bit. Among the distinguished crowd that's here, I noticed one of our national heroes walking around, changing the face of politics for Canada. Elizabeth May is over here, and we're delighted to have her here. So before we begin our program, Trevor Davies is here from QP, and Trevor, if you wouldn't mind coming up, he has a few words to say. For those of you who don't know, the whole forum is free to you, including today's free lunch, which catered by the Gourmet Girls, which will follow all this food, hall rental, payment for travel costs, all the expenses associated with this event. Come out of a fund from QP Local 401 in Nanaimo. All their members, about 600 to 700 members, set aside a piece of their paycheck, every paycheck they do, into a fund to create educational opportunities for progressive movements on Vancouver Island. And all of this event is funded by our brothers and sisters in the trade union movement, and we owe them a huge debt of thanks.
Thank you. Well, I guess I should start by saying on behalf of our president of QPBC, Mark Hancock, and the secretary-treasurer, Paul Farrow, I, of course, want to thank you for having me here, and, of course, for all of you who are actually doing the real work to protect water in our communities. Now, I know Roger's around here somewhere, so I hope there's no general disappointment that, of course, Mark or brother Paul couldn't make it. I get the opportunity as a vice president to attend a lot of events, and I have to say this one I'm particularly happy to be at. Being that I am an Islander, I live down in Victoria, and I have the distinct pleasure of being one of the few people living in a community that has a publicly owned watershed. And when you think about the fact that so many communities across the province, almost the vast majority of communities across the province that have corporately controlled watersheds, it's just beyond frustrating and scary to think that that's the state of affairs. Now, to really grasp this, you need to think of one of those outrageous scenarios and just try to comprehend the fact that we spend billions, capital B, billions of dollars and countless hours searching for water around the galaxy when we, and you have to pardon the pun on this one, spend a drop in the bucket. Yeah, that's, you can tell I got speechwriters. A drop in the bucket we spend protecting the water on this very planet that we have today for generations to come. And when you think about that, it just shocks and, well, to me, frustrates and depresses. But like a lot of events, and like, for me, I'm not too old. Yes, thank you. Don't let the hairline fool you. Yeah. It's an occupational hazard as a union president. But I remember all the great stories, right? Whenever there's some sort of large obstacle, mountain to climb. All the great stories have that same message, which is a few committed people working together, doing what's right, can move a mountain, can achieve great things. And so as frustrating, as depressing is to think at the state of affairs someday in this country and how we treat our water, looking out at this room, seeing a room packed on a Saturday, that's inspiring, that gives me hope. It's something that I'm proud as QPBC that we can support. And I want to commit to you, I promise you that through QPBC, myself, we're going to keep working together because why? Water should be a human right, and we're not going to stop until we get that. And working with all of you, we can achieve that goal. So on behalf of QPBC, Brother Mark, Paul, and the 85,000 members of QPBC, we are with you, we are united. Thank you for having me, and let's get to work. Thank you very much.
So, on we go to introducing Maude Barlow. I'm really dumbstruck, what am I supposed to say? I first met Maude here in this community in, I think, the early 1990s when we started the local chapter of the Council of Canadians. And Maude, got on the plane from wherever she was coming and came here to give our local chapter of the Council of Canadians a boost to get us going and get us started. We were packed in at the Westerly Hotel. And back then I remember thinking, oh, God, I wonder how this woman finds the energy to do what she's been doing up to that point. So now we fast forward, it's 25 years later, gulp, and she's still doing it. And I was just thinking, suppose we could imagine principles in our ruling process that embodied what Maude and Elizabeth and the other fabulous leaders across the country actually implemented the vision that they have created and continue to hold out in front of us. But there's nobody, in my opinion, in Canada who's done a better job of that on behalf of all ordinary Canadians than Maude Barlow. So let's welcome her again.
Thank you so much for such a gorgeous introduction. Thank you all very, very much for being here. I'm terribly moved that on a gorgeous spring day like this you would be here. I actually took a run along your waterfront this morning, and it is absolutely beautiful. I promise not to tell the whole world about how wonderful the city is. Thank you. A special thank you to the Vancouver Island Water Watch Coalition, June, and everyone, and the work you've done putting this together. I know we just thanked CUPE, but it needs to be said again. CUPE, the Canadian Union of Public Employees, is behind the social movement in this country like no other union has ever been, and we just owe them so much, and it is so important to say that. Thank you to Kel for a tremendous job emceeing. Thank you so much to all my friends, my panelists today, Jessica, Andrew, and Ingmar. Damien, last night you were absolutely sensational. Those of you who weren't here, Damien just gave the most brilliant presentation on LNG and on fracking and on the myths behind it. It was absolutely wonderful. A big shout out to my dear and sweet friend Elizabeth May, who is my chauffeur, she tells me this weekend. That's what she's doing. And I say, you're nobody's chauffeur, Elizabeth May. You are a powerhouse onto your own. And I just want to say a special loving shout out to Gwyn Frayne, who has come here this morning. Who we love with all our heart. And we carry on all of our work in your name, Gwyn. We thank you. I tell you a little story. I just came yesterday from Detroit, Michigan. Now we're fighting, before that I was in Istanbul, but anyway, that's another story. So why was I in Detroit? Well, as you know, British Columbia is being seen as a kind of carbon corridor So are the Great Lakes, and I've just written a report called Liquid Pipeline, Extreme Energy Threat to the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence River. And we have a movement around the Great Lakes to get the Great Lakes to be understood as a watershed and to be governed as a watershed and to be considered a commons, a public trust, and a protected bioregion. So it's very exciting. So I've been doing a lot of work around the Great Lakes and was in Detroit for that. But the emergency issue in Detroit is not the potential threat of invasive species or extreme energy. It is that by the end of the summer, the Department of Water and Sewerage intends to cut 120,000 people. Can we stop the, thank you. 120,000 people off of their water and sewer. And they have hired private security people, and they are coming into the inner city, and they are going house to house, and they are cutting off the water to anybody who has not paid their water bills in 2 months. And it is an absolute travesty. People home from hospital have no running water. Their families, 2/3 of these families have children. There is no water for cooking, no water for flushing. They don't even give you time to fill up your bathtub before you do this. The story of Detroit is a story of many of our communities, I believe, if we don't reverse the way we are going and the policies and priorities that we have in our world. What happened is that after decades of neoliberal market theology, and deep cuts to social programs, deep cuts to infrastructure. They don't fix those old pipes. They leak all winter. That's where the water's going. Globalization and the death of the auto industry, or the gutting of the auto industry, many people left Detroit. About 1 million people left. The businesses left, the wealth left. They moved into wealthy suburbs around the area. And they left mostly African Americans. It's 85 to 90% African American and poor. And they did not even bother to send bills to the people in the city from the sewage department, the water department, because that was one of the cuts that came along. Fast forward to a few months ago, they put the Detroit into receivership. It's in bankruptcy. They have a high-priced bankruptcy lawyer who has been brought in as the emergency manager, and his job is to find money to pay off the debt. So he is going around talking about selling all of their art. They have one of the most famous art collections in the world. But wealthy patrons have moved in and are taking them to court, and the water system. So they're privatizing Detroit's water system, and in order to make it palatable, fluff it up for investors, they are getting rid of the debt by cutting the water to people, and it's an absolutely appalling travesty. First of all, it's a violation of the human right to water. One of the obligations under the human right to water is that you cannot remove a right that has been already established, but it doesn't matter. They're just coming in. There's no one for anyone to go to because the mayor and city council have been disbanded, and the governor is right-wing, and the governor is the one who said, go and sell off whatever you have to. Starting you with that story because I was really upset. I wrote an absolutely frantic, angry blog, which I'll revisit Monday to see if I'm still as angry about it when I see it and before I send it out. But in the New Yorker, they quote the CEO. They actually elect a CEO of Oakland County. That's actually, there's such business, it's so business-oriented now that the senior council person in one of the counties is actually called a CEO, Chief Executive Officer, but he is elected. His name is Patterson. He was just interviewed by the New Yorker, and he said, I said 30 years ago something that turned out to be right. I said that Detroit City would be like an Indian reservation, and what we should do is put a wall around it and throw in corn and blankets. Well, I guess I was right. This is a man who gets elected with a huge majority every single time. In fact, the last time he got elected, he'd been in a car accident. He was in a coma when he got elected. And everybody knows he has those views, and he still got elected. So I'm running on anger this morning, to be very honest with you, because I believe with all my heart that those people getting their water cut off, let me repeat, 120,000 residences will have their water and sewage cut off by the end of the summer in inner city Detroit. If this were white middle-class people, this would be a story not only on CNN and everywhere else, it would be a story around the world. So we have a situation in our world where more and more power is being moved to the top, grabbed by the top, and as we know, more and more infrastructure, public infrastructure, is being turned over to the private sector. And to me, Detroit is a harbinger, is the canary in the coal mine of what's going to happen. I haven't seen anything in North America like Detroit, that reminded me of the struggles in Latin America, which are literally street by street, neighborhood by neighborhood, because there is no authority and no one to turn to. And it really made me fearful. I have to start off on this beautiful morning with that fearful story. So we have a situation in the world around water, and I don't have time to go into all of the details, but I detail it in my new book, Blue Planet, Protecting Water for People in the Planet, Blue Future, Protecting Water for People in the Planet Forever. And the lesson we all learned in grade 6, that you can never run out of water, is simply not true. The water, yes, is here on the planet somewhere, but we are polluting, mismanaging, and most importantly, displacing water from where nature put it and where it's needed for a healthy hydrologic cycle. And this is a huge part of the climate story that isn't being told, to where we want it, because water serves us. In our modern view of looking at water, water belongs to us. It's simply a resource for us. A colleague of mine calls it modern water, and quotes an advisor to President Hoover when they were building the Hoover Dam, who said that America will be great when she conquers her water. So this notion of conquering nature and making it serve us is coming back to slap us. We are pumping up groundwater far faster than it can be replenished. A massive global study a couple of years ago said that we are doubling our groundwater takings every 20 years. And this came from a technology that wasn't developed till the 1950s, when they discovered deep borewell, circular borewell technology. And suddenly the prairies in the United States changed from being hard scrabble living to this, mighty, beautiful, lush Garden of Eden. But that they're pumping up the water in the Ogallala so fast that the Department of Agriculture in the United States said last year, the Ogallala Aquifer, and that's that mighty aquifer that goes down the spine of the US down to Texas, will be gone in our lifetime. They said there's no way to stop it now. The decline is for sure. There are 200,000 bore wells pumping that water mercilessly 24/7, and they said it's just a case of trying to adapt at some level. And I thought, well, now that's going to be a front page story of every newspaper in North America, that the mighty Ogallala will be gone in our lifetime. Wasn't. So we have a situation in our world where we really do have a crisis. And just two more very quick examples. One is that the government of China has just acknowledged a Greenpeace report that says that half the rivers in China since 1990, just since 1990, half the rivers in China are gone. I don't mean polluted. They were probably polluted first. They're gone. They've disappeared. And that same groundwater study said that if the Great Lakes of North America are being pumped as relentlessly as water around the world, the Great Lakes could be bone dry in 80 years. Now, these are really disturbing reports that are coming to us, including another one from the bottled water and the big ag business, saying that by 2030, our demand for water will outstrip supply by 40% in our world. So the way it looks is that the demand is going straight up and the water supply is going straight down. And so we have a mighty contest. We were second to discover how powerful a world without water could be to the corporate interests in this world. The private sector knew before most of us did that this was going to be a very powerful new frontier for them. And so there's a mighty contest taking place about whether water is a commons or whether water is a commodity. And as we speak, life and death decisions are being made in many countries around the dwindling water supplies. Shall they go to free trade zones, industrial sites, the big agribusiness, land grabs, or will they go to preserve life for small communities, for farmers, for indigenous peoples? I have a case study in the book on Karnataka, which is a state of India that calls itself the Silicon Valley of India. That's what they want to be. And they've not only privatized all their water in terms of water services and turned off all public taps so that people have to turn to private water sources or bottled water, but they also are creating many, many of these free trade industrial zones. These are tax-free, environment-free, labor rule-free zones, and the water is moving very clearly with clear political direction in those areas, and not to the villages who are desperate. I mean, 85% of the villages in this state are in a desperate situation water-wise. So already this is happening. This isn't at some kind of time in the future. In Chile, the government allows public auctions, and they've also privatized absolutely all of their water. water services, but they also hold public auctions on raw water. And Canadian mining companies come in and they bid for water against local indigenous communities and farmers and local villages. And if they bid higher, which they always do, they own the water. They actually own the actual water and can do with it what they will. And this is, as I say, this is this notion that water exists to serve us. Now, I think we're going in that direction in this country. I mean, I can give you examples from all over the world, but bringing it back here, what are we seeing? Well, I think that the Harper government and many corporations and certainly the extractive industries in this country see water as this notion of modern water here to serve us for our pleasure and our profit. It's affecting us in a number of ways. Many people don't know, but CUPE knows because we've been working very closely with CUPE on this. Several budgets ago, the Harper government said that any municipality that needs funding for infrastructure upgrading or new infrastructure will not get federal funding unless they go to a public-private partnership. And so we now have, that at the time didn't make a ripple except for those of us watching this, but now we have a number of cities where this is, the decision is now. Abbotsford made a decision not to go with privatization and didn't get the public money, good for them. Regina, we actually held a referendum, which we lost because the city council put close to $400,000 into the yes, privatization is wonderful side, and I am absolutely convinced there was federal money behind that. St. John, New Brunswick is going through this debate right now and has said they're not enthusiastic the way the Regina City Council was, but they need the money, they need the federal funding. So the Harper government is doing to Canadian municipalities what the World Bank does to poor countries, which is exactly the same thing. If you want funding from the World Bank and you are a poor country needing this, you will have to bring in a private company and we'll tell you, all the how to do it. One of the first of those was the famous Cochabamba case back in the late 1990s. I was involved in that very deeply. An engineering company called Bechtel got the contract and set up a water utility. They tripled the price of water in a country that's 85% indigenous and one of the poorest countries in South America. And then they said, and we also own the water coming from the sky. So anybody gathering water, we own that, and they had inspectors going around seeing if you were trying to hide rainwater. And there was a revolution, and the people took to the streets, and the army was called out, and people were killed. I mean, it was a water war, which we won, our side won, and Bechtel was forced to leave, and the World Bank was forced to leave. And you should know this remunicipalization is happening right across Latin America. The companies aren't even there anymore, except for some of the existing contracts. And 40 municipalities in France, including Paris, have brought their water back under public control in the last couple of years. So, I mean, there has been an enormous fight back. Back to Canada, we have the government's promoting the notion of water trading. Alberta's going to be the first province probably, but British Columbia, I'm warning you, is going to be next. Water trading is where you convert licenses to property, to a water right, and then you allow that to be traded and sold, sometimes on the open market, depends on how far they go. Australia brought in water trading, converted water licenses to trading to property in 1993. And what happened, they thought, oh, well, everybody will take better care of water because they can sell their surplus. That was the idea, right? Of course, what happened was the big farmers gobbled up the small farmers, then the investors came in, then the foreign investors came in, and the price of water skyrocketed. And 10 years later, when a Labour government tried to buy water back for the desperate Murray-Darling River, which, desperate for water, they couldn't afford to buy it back because they no longer controlled water. And there are even legal scholars in Australia now who say that the constitutional guarantee that water belongs to the people probably doesn't hold anymore because of the water trading. So we're going to see that fight coming up in this country. And then, of course, we've got Stephen Harper gutting all of the freshwater protection in this country. The Fisheries Act, the Navigable Waters Protection Act, the Environmental Assessment Act. As it stands now, over 99% of all our lakes and rivers are totally unprotected at the federal level from any pipe carrying any kind of poison, diluted bitumen from the tar sands, fracked oil, fracked wastewater, whatever. on, under, or around these lakes. And you should know that on the Great Lakes, they've started barging heavy extreme oil. And the United States Coast Guard has just announced that it's going to allow the barging on ships and the moving by ship, transport by marine transport of wastewater from fracking operations. So we are putting our water directly at risk with this. And what's happened in this country is this, I say to Americans, it's as if your government gutted your Clean Water Act. That's the equivalent of what has happened here. And I think we have to ask the other political parties, I know we have one here, and I know exactly where she stands and she and her colleagues stand, but the other political parties, opposition parties, have to be asked, would you reintroduce, will you bring back the power of those freshwater laws that were gutted? It is an incredibly important question for us to ask. And then we need to understand that this government is out pushing more trade and investment agreements than any government in the world, way more than the United States. I mean, they are, free trade are us, and this government doesn't care what your record is, doesn't care about your human rights record, your environmental record. They are moving to have Canada 100% tariff-free. Just come on in. There are no protections and regulations. And these trade and investment agreements threaten water in three ways, and I want to be very specific. First of all, they lock in privatization. So any of these municipalities that are moving to privatization, like Regina, like St. John, New Brunswick, once they go there, if the government does sign the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement with Europe, two biggest water companies in the world are Suez and Veolia. Those two companies are for sure going to be bidding on these contracts. If a future city council in Regina were to say, as hundreds are around the world, geez, that was a mistake, and we're going to remunicipalize and bring this back into the public realm, they couldn't do it. So it locks in privatization, and I believe the Harper government is absolutely aware of that. The second thing these trade and investment agreements do is prevent governments from bringing in the kind of legislation to protect their water. Because even though okay, I'll give you an example. The Alberta government says, dream along with me, okay, all of the companies have to cut their water footprint in half and they have to clean up, X amount on this kind of deadline. All the companies would have to do it, including the foreign companies. But any foreign company, either from the United States under NAFTA or China under the proposed FIPA or Europe under CETA, would have the right to ask for compensation. And we have a legal opinion that says that these companies would have the right to sue for billions of dollars in compensation from the Canadian government, because it's the Canadian government that signs these agreements. So it's a chill, and what I worry about is if we do get, dream along again, a good government replacing Stephen Harper's government, would they be able to afford? Would they be able to take a chance to reintroduce the laws that have been gutted? So it's really important, I think, for us to understand that these trade agreements lock in the lowest possible standard. And the third thing trade and investment agreements do is that they are now allowing foreign corporations to claim the actual water itself. This is what we're finding with the land and water grabs, say in Africa, where an area 3 times the size of Great Britain has been bought up by hedge funds and wealthy investors and wealthy countries. Under trade agreements, trade and investment agreements, they not only have the right to claim to be there and have the laws quite low, but they can actually claim to own the land and the water. And we have a very bad precedent in Canada where a pulp and paper company called Abitibi-Bowater was operating for decades in Newfoundland, producing jobs. 5 years ago, they went bankrupt, they left. They turned around and they said, we want financial compensation. They left the pensions behind. We want financial compensation for the water rights that we left behind. And it was Danny Williams who was premier, and he told them where they could put that little thought, right? So they launched a Chapter 11 challenge under NAFTA. And rather than go to bat for Newfoundland, the Harper government turned around and gave them $130 million. So we now have a precedent where a foreign corporation, it could be an agribusiness, it could be Monsanto, it could be a mining company, it could be an energy company, it could be a pulp and paper, any company that's operating in another country that requires water, if that country has an investment agreement between the governments, they can actually sue to claim the actual water. So this is the way, bit by bit by bit, we see the rights removed from ordinary people. And I know I started off with Detroit, and it sounds extreme, but I actually don't think it is, because you know what? In Europe, under the austerity agenda, a number of countries are actually not only privatizing their water, but they've jacked the water rates up, and people are having their water cut off. In Greece, Italy, Spain, and Bulgaria, thousands of homes have had their water cut off. So this is not far away anymore. This is the way we are moving. So what's the solution? Well, I believe with all my heart that we need a radical realignment of our relationship with nature. We also need a radical realignment, obviously, of our political, economic systems, which we all know, and I'm not going to go into. I mean, goals of unlimited growth and deregulation and unregulated trade, financial deregulation has led us to this place, and we know that we need a fundamentally different system. But as far as water is concerned, what I call for in Blue Future is that we have a new water ethic. And that water ethic says that we have to put water and its protection at the heart of everything we do. Every single law, every policy, every action, every practice, we have to say, what's the impact on water of whatever we're doing? What would trade policy look like if we protected water? Wow, take water out as a tradable good, as an investment. Ask questions about the water content of the stuff that you're either sending out or bringing in. I mean, under this CETA, we're going to be dramatically increasing beef exports to Europe, mostly coming from Alberta. Alberta doesn't have the water for these beef exports, but anybody who knows anything about that's been fired. So nobody's listening to those saying, you can't put any more pressure on Alberta's water sources. I mean, CETA is also dangerous to the environment. So we need to say, what would it look like if we looked at food policy? We would not have a global food market. We would not have corporate agribusiness. We would have very different local sustainable food production if we asked about water. One of the biggest guzzlers of water in our world are biofuels. And we would not have a biofuel industry. That's what's ruining the Ogallala. It's massive amounts of corn and cotton being grown, the corn for biofuels. 40% of all of the corn now grown in the United States has to be used for fuels, biofuels. So I deeply believe that we need to ask ourselves the question about water in a different way, and I offer then 4 principles upon which this could be based, and then I'm going to shut up. The first principle is that water is a human right. And you can say to me, well, that's a motherhood. And I will say to you then, tell me why it took us 20 years to get it recognized at the United Nations. It was a huge fight. Our country led the fight against it, but so were the Americans opposed, so was Great Britain, et cetera, all the big companies, the World Bank. We were up against the power of the world. And we came together, a small group of us, a wonderful man, Miguel Descaldo Brockman, who was the 63rd president of the UN General Assembly, who asked me to work with him, and a man named Pablo Solon, who was the ambassador to the United Nations from Bolivia. And we came up with a plan, and we put it before the General Assembly. And they said, well, drop sanitation. And we said, no, we'd rather lose a good resolution than win a compromised resolution. And I thought we were going to lose. I was there in July 28, 2010, in the balcony of the General Assembly, watching this happen. And because it went to a vote, they all sit in their seats, and it goes up on a big electronic board at the front. So I was holding hands with my staff, saying that we're going to lose, but don't worry, we'll be back in 5 years. I was playing the, happy, everything's going to be all right, because one of them was in tears. Well, I was wrong. 122 countries voted in favor, and none voted against. 41 abstained, including Canada, and it was an incredible moment. In my opinion, the human species took an evolutionary step forward on that day. So water is a human right. What's happening in Detroit is a direct and complete violation. What's happening on many, many First Nations communities in this country is a direct violation of the human right to water and sanitation. And I think Here's what you need to know. There are 3 obligations upon a government. Every government has to come up with a plan when a new right is acknowledged, and it has to present that to the UN. I don't suppose our government's doing it, but we're writing it for them. I mean, we're writing what they should be doing. But they have to have, they're supposed to have the obligation to fulfill, so to make it happen. Where water and sanitation are not delivered, they have to have a plan to do that. They have to respect, that is, they cannot remove a right that has been already granted. But the third is they have the obligation to protect, and that is that they have the obligation not to allow a third party to destroy water. And I think we should be using the human right to water and sanitation in our fights against fracking and coal mining and the extractive industries, the tar sands in Alberta. I think we need to be saying it's a direct threat not only to the water, but to the human right to water. And I can show you the exact lines in the description of this by the Human Rights Council. So we have a weapon, a tool that I think that we can use. And just to tell you that the first court case on this was launched by the Kalahari Bushmen of Botswana. The government was trying to push them off the desert for decades as a form of genocide. When they kept coming back, because the government had discovered diamonds and they wanted them gone, and now they're fracking in the Kalahari. As the people came back, they said, okay, well, we'll smash your water borehole, and they smashed their only access to water. And people were literally dying of thirst. They went to court, they won the right to go back to the desert, but not the right to water. But once we got the resolution through the United Nations, they went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, yes, in fact, armed with that, and knowing that this is now an international obligation, you have the right to have your bore well reopened. So it was a small victory and a whole bunch of bad things, but it was a sweet and important victory, I can tell you. So that's the first. Water is a human right. The second is that water is a public trust. And by that we mean that water belongs to all of us. It's part of our common heritage. And no one has the right to appropriate it for private profit. No one has the right to own it, buy it, sell it, hoard it. And let me tell you, if you go to any business school in the world, they're teaching that water is a commodity that's no different than oil and gas and should be put out there on the open market for sale. That is what is being taught. That is where the World Bank is going. That is where the OECD is going. That's where huge parts of the UN are going. So it's really important that we have a fight back that says, when we look at the use of a water, and we're talking about fiercely protected, managed public trust, right? Not a free-for-all, a fiercely protected, managed trust. You have to convince us, if you want to use that water, that you'll take care of it, you won't overuse it. And so the test for access will not only be accessibility, quality of accessibility, justice, but the future health of that watershed. And I helped work on law in Vermont when they brought in legislation to declare their groundwater to be a public trust. And they said in times of any kind of conflict or shortage, there are 3 priorities: water for life, for drinking water and people's use, water for the ecosystem, and water for local sustainable food production, not massive export. So, you can get quite specific around how the local water is to be used. The third is that water has rights too. And this basically says that yes, we have the right to water, but there is the right of water. And this is a whole movement around the rights of nature, the rights of Mother Earth, which is a very exciting movement that a number of us are part of, and we've actually drafted something called the Universal Declaration on the Rights of Mother Earth. We drafted that in Cochabamba as well. It's another Cochabamba story after the failure of the Copenhagen Summit, the climate summit in 2009. And basically, it's a plea to and a manifesto to say that in the West particularly, we see water and nature as our personal property, and our laws are not compatible to the laws of nature. So somebody mocks it and says, oh, you guys are saying you can't go fishing. And we're saying, no, but we're not saying that, but you can't fish a species to extinction. So what does it mean? And how do we put watershed protection and watershed restoration at the heart of everything we do? It's incredibly important piece of this. And then finally, my fourth principle in my new water ethic is that water can teach us how to live together. And by this, I'm asking the question, in a world of declining water stocks, clean, accessible water stocks, and dramatically growing demands, How are we going to avoid conflict and violence and even war around water? And I'll tell you right now, as we speak, water is being used as a weapon of war in Syria. The government is cutting off the water supplies to Aleppo. And there's a water story in many, 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 many conflicts around the world. But just as it's possible for us to have conflict around water, I believe that water could be nature's gift to teach us how to live together with one another. And I write in the book about a number of examples. One of them is a group in Israel and Palestine and Lebanon and a number of the warring countries in the area that have come together to protect the Jordan River and to restore the Jordan River. And they say we don't talk politics, history, religion, because we can't, but we do know that maybe my grandfather was taught to hate your grandfather and your father was taught to hate my father. But you know what? I don't have time to hate you because our watershed is dying, and we need together to come together on this. And in one area, they've actually taken down a piece of the wall because the kids all got to know each other through this project. So the dream here is basically, can our water crisis become the source of global peace? Can we understand that water is the source of life and bow before the need to protect it? And through our work together, can the peoples of the world come together and learn to treat each other differently? And it's a dream that I have, and I have some very real examples in the work that I have witnessed around the world. So I'm going to end with just two quotes, and first of all, thank you very much for this wonderful day, and I'm spending the whole day with you, so I'm just thrilled to be here. And thank you for the work you're doing, protecting the water of this beautiful, beautiful island. Just the first quote is Saint-Exupéry from The Little Prince. The Little Prince says that in the morning, after you bathe and dress, you must tend your planet. It's quite lovely. And the other is the wonderful Thomas Berry. He said, "What happens in the outer world happens in the inner world. If the outer world is diminished in its grandeur, the emotional, imaginative, intellectual, and spiritual life of the human is diminished or extinguished." I keep thinking of my friends in inner city Detroit. One of them said to me, "Just because I live in poverty doesn't mean I don't care about nature, you know." Thomas Berry says, "Without the soaring birds, the great forests, the sounds and coloration of the insects, the free-flowing streams, the flowering fields, the sight of the clouds by day, and the stars at night, we become impoverished in all that makes us human." Thank you so much.
So thank you so much, Maud. Before we give you your final thanks, we're going to do a little something surprise here. So in January, when we heard about Gwen's illness, the coalition of which she's been a founding member with the Council of Canadians held a Last Supper for Gwen. And that was like 5 months ago. And her indomitable spirit is still here. So last week, we had the glorious invitation for lunch at Gwen's house, Peggy and I. And I said, "God, you're still here." And she said, "Well, I'm waiting to see Maud," she said. So, Maud is like a backbone at a national level, and Gwen has done a lot of work at that national level too. But Gwen is, for those activists in the community here, she's the backbone of this community. So this incredible opportunity for these two fine women to present themselves to you and for us to give our thanks to both of them. Okay, our next speaker is Andrew Nikiforuk. We'll be taking a break at about 10:30 and then 2 speakers after the break. For more than 2 decades, Andrew has written about energy, economics, and the West. A lot of work in the province of Alberta. He investigated the social and ecological impacts of intensive livestock industries, the feedlots in Alberta, the legacy of northern uranium mining, and most recently he's been involved in looking at issues around the petroleum industry. Andrew's last 2 books are The Tar Sands, Dirty Oil and the Future of the Continent, and his latest book called The Energy of Slaves, Oil and the New Servitude. Andrew's with us today. He's here. It was a timely coincidence that Andrew was chosen to be the writer-in-residence for the winter at Haig Brown House in Campbell River. So he's one of Canada's foremost journalists, one of Canada's brightest minds, and we're honored to have him here today. So please welcome Andrew Nikiforuk.
Well, good morning. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. And in particular, I would like to thank the hard-working men and women from CUPE who have made this day possible. Which is a reminder that it is always human energy that gets the best things done. So today I'm going to talk about bad marriages. In particular, really the bad, deteriorating marriage between energy and water. I'm going to talk a bit about the tar sands, a bit about LNG and fracking, and end with a few comments about what this all means for you people here that live above coal seams on Vancouver Island. Because you need to start thinking about this. All right. I think the title sort of says it all. It also says where I'm coming from. I think we're in deep trouble. My other title for this talk was The Fuck Up Between Energy and Water. I don't think we need to be polite about these things anymore. Now, just as a quick reference, I'm working on a book on hydraulic fracturing. It will be out next year. And most of my comments about energy tonight, if you are really interested in them, you can read about them in this book, Energy of Slaves, which I guarantee will change the way you think about energy and how you use it. Or more profoundly, how we abuse cheap energy in our lives every day. Having been in Campbell River for the last 4 months and living by the Campbell River and waking up every morning and hearing that river, it was an amazing experience coming from very dry southern Alberta. But Roderick Haig Brown, what an extraordinary individual. If you have not read the book Measure of a Year, do so. It is one of the most profound pieces of nonfiction written by a Canadian. And it will remind you why this country was at one time a great place. And so he had this to say: conservation means fair and honest dealing with the future, usually at some cost to the immediate present. It involves a sacrifice. How about that? It is a simple morality with little to offset the glamour and quick material rewards of the North American deity progress. And he wrote that in the 1950s. All right, so my first point here is that business is over. We know business is over when we have to dig up a forest the size of Rhode Island to get our oil. You know, as Jeff Rubin, the economist, puts it, you know, when you have to dig up 2 tons of sand to make 1 barrel of oil, you know you're at the bottom of the 9th inning. When you have to drill 2 miles beneath the ocean floor in the Gulf of Mexico, you know you're at the bottom of the 9th inning. And when you have to take tons of water, sand, and chemicals and blast them at incredibly high pressure 2 miles beneath the ground, and then horizontally another 3 to 4 miles underneath the ground to blast apart shale rock, you also know you are at the bottom of the 9th inning. These are extreme events that indicate that the resource that was once abundant, but also was forever finite, and we're coming to the bottom of it. Same thing with fisheries. We've done, almost exactly the same thing, except this was a biological living resource that is renewable. We're talking about stuff that is not renewable. So we're in the era of extreme difficult oil. Takes a lot of money, takes a lot of energy, takes high environmental costs, and a high degree of complexity. And all of this imposes a high degree of risk, unprecedented risk, on public resources and on human communities. And what we are doing at this state and time, because all of this stuff costs so much money, is we're pulling it out of other parts of the economy, cannibalizing other parts of the economy, so that more and more resources in the economy are devoted to energy extraction, energy production, energy distribution. And so the economy that looked like this is now looking like this. And the world that everyone said was going to go on and grow, is actually going to shrink. Energy is to the global economy what water is to the human community. What have we used cheap energy for? We've used it to create all of this complexity. And the more complexity we build, the more energy we need to solve all of the fundamental problems that we have created by building this incredible spiral staircase. And we've now reached the point where we've kind of climbed as high as we can get with the price of energy escalating. LNG. How complex is this? You take gas out of the ground, then you liquefy and cool it to minus 161 degrees. And then you put it on a tanker, and then you ship it overseas, and then you have to regasify it at the other end. And in this process, you will use between 8 to 15% of the natural gas in the pipe to cool and liquefy it and compress it. And then you'll use another 2% at the other end to regasify it. The complexities in the interaction between water and energy are profound, all right? So greenhouse gas emissions, they go into the atmosphere, they destabilize the climate. That has all kinds of consequences for water, where water appears, when it does not appear, most profoundly for the ocean and for our glaciers. So here's a U.S. climate report came out just last week. And they're making a big deal out of the fact that the glaciers in Alaska and in British Columbia are shrinking, and that's going to have implications for hydropower production, ocean circulation patterns, fisheries, and global sea level rise. Note, it is not a Canadian publication. All the CO2 in the atmosphere, trees can only absorb so much. The oceans absorb about half of it, and they're getting sick on the amount of CO2 that they've had to absorb since the Industrial Revolution. So the carbon dioxide is being absorbed by the ocean, it dissolves in the water, becomes carbonic acid, breaks down and forms into other ions. These ions, in turn, are dissolving the shells of coral and shellfish. Anyone know what this is? Elizabeth May. She's always at the top of her class. This is a pteropod. Does anybody know which animal feeds on pteropods? Juvenile salmon. So look at here. Here's a pteropod that's been put into ocean water that has been acidified at the level we predict oceans will be by within 100 years. And this is what happens to them in 45 days. And I will remind you, just 3 months ago, $10 million worth of scallop production offshore of Vancouver Island was destroyed by acidified ocean currents. You don't have to wait 100 years for this to happen. It's happening now in real time. Now, 15% of total global water production, or global water, 15% of the water that we would draw every year is by the energy industry. They use a hell of a lot of water, 583 billion cubic meters, and of that, 66 billion is lost or consumed or destroyed. We will not see again. This energy thirst is increasing as we employ more and more, go after more and more extreme hydrocarbons. And so what's 135 billion cubic meters? Well, that's enough water for 115 million US residences, unless of course you're living in Detroit, for 3 years. So that's the amount of water the energy industry alone will be destroying by 2035. These figures are from the International Energy Agency, and they do not include things like this. So go to Louisiana, go to the Gulf Coast, where the oil and gas industry has been operating for 40 or 50 years, and their pipelines and their canals through the Delta, the Mississippi Delta, have eroded this delta to this degree that the landmass being lost there has now been equivalent to something like 2,000 square miles as a result of oil and gas activity. There's a major lawsuit on this very issue. You can go to the tar sands, and the International Energy Agency doesn't tell you about the fact that 50% of the mined area was at one time muskeg and peatland, and it is destroyed. We have no way of replacing this, no mandate to replace it. So this marriage between water and energy is fundamentally one of abuse that is getting worse. Go to Saudi Arabia. The Saudis spend 1.5 million barrels of oil every day to do what? To desalinate water. This is a desalination plant under construction. Some of the world's largest desalination plants are all in Saudi Arabia. Why? Because they've exhausted all their groundwater. They've pumped all of it. And the Saudis are really getting really concerned. They're thinking, we won't be able to export oil because we're going to be burning all of our oil to turn ocean water into fresh water. There are water implications for green energy too. Low carbon does not mean low water usage. Here's a concentrated solar tower. You concentrate the solar rays, the mirrors reflect it to these wonderful kind of pillars, and all of that heat is being used to boil water, to power a turbine. Amazing technology, but incredibly water intensive. And where we want to put most solar power is in areas where there is a great deal of water scarcity. So, now, a few tales from the tar sands. All right? Every year, the tar sands consumes or uses 370 million cubic meters of water. Okay? Cubic meter is equal to 468 gallons. So every year, it is using enough water to sustain a city of 2 million people. And just like Damien mentioned the other night, every year, the fracking industry in northern BC is using enough water to sustain one city the size of Calgary. So you've got to start thinking about these energy projects in terms of cities consuming enormous amounts of water. So it takes 3 barrels of water, or 3 to 4 to make 1 barrel of bitumen. We know that this is going to increase dramatically up to 500 million cubic meters over the next years if all these pipelines get built, which I must add again, I want to congratulate the First Nations of this province for becoming the conscience of the country and saying no to these pipelines. So this industry is withdrawing from the Athabasca River 2 to 3% of its annual flow. In the wintertime, the withdrawals, when the river draws down, the withdrawal rate is equivalent to 25% of the river's flow. And then, of course, we've got a waste stream, right? It's a mining operation. We've got a waste stream associated with the bitumen production, which is extraordinary. We now have some of the world's largest dams hold all of this contaminated water, 180 square kilometers. Right? You could flood downtown Vancouver with all of the contaminated waste we now have accumulated in the tar sands. That's 1 billion cubic meters of mining waste. 6 billion barrels and growing every day. You could build a canal 10 by 20 meters wide from one end of the country, from the Pacific coast to the Atlantic coast, and you could fill it with mining waste from the tar sands. By 2025, the Pembina Institute estimates that every month there will be enough mining waste being created in the tar sands to flood Central Park in New York up to 4 meters deep every month. One economist estimated that it would cost $24 billion to clean up all this toxic waste. But there's no will to do it. The solution here is we're going to dig more holes in the ground. We're going to put all this polluted water in it, cap it with some fresh water, and hope like hell that Mother Nature will undo what we have done. We're also very good at taking landscapes like this and turning them into landscapes like this. The other incredible water story in the tar sands has to do with air pollution, basically, from upgraders, and a lot of the air pollution also coming from evaporation from these tailings ponds. David Schindler has done phenomenal work on this and proving that every year the deposition of crap and bitumen and heavy metals and so on from tar sands production is equivalent to an oil spill on the Athabasca River equal to 5,000 to 13,000 barrels of oil. And it all gets flushed out in the spring. So all this stuff accumulates in snowpack over the wintertime and flushes into the river in the springtime. Here's our other great water altering project in the tar sands, SAGD, steam-assisted gravity drainage. 80% of the resource can only be tackled this way. It's very similar to a hydraulic fracturing. You take huge amounts of natural gas, you boil water, and then you inject this water under very high pressures, 500 meters under the ground, to melt the bitumen. And quite in the process, you do a whole bunch of other things. You will fracture caprock, you will infiltrate groundwater aquifers, and you will find all kinds of leaks happening all over the place. Sometimes, if you put it under too much pressure, as in 2006, Total created a 300-meter hole in the forest. That was a whoopsie moment in the tar sands. Here was another whoopsie moment. This is Canadian Natural Resources, just last year, where they have released ongoing for more than a year now, 12,000 barrels of bitumen coming up through 4 different fissures in the ground. Some of these fissures are 150 meters long in the forest. What do we know about groundwater in the tar sands? You know, this is the Canadian experience. We don't know anything. No, we didn't do our baseline data. We didn't do the proper research in science before we approved these projects. Every day in the tar sands, we use enough natural gas to heat 6 million homes, and we use this to produce bitumen. And we also use it to upgrade bitumen because it's such a crappy project. You have to crack natural gas and take the hydrogen out of it and add it to the bitumen to enrich it so that you have something called synthetic crude. The SAGD process uses 4 times more natural gas than the mining process. And where is that natural gas coming from? And this is where you are now part of this story. 50% of that gas is coming from northern British Columbia. 50% of all the gas you produce here, is being exported to Alberta. So natural gas here in northern BC is being used to produce bitumen with the hopes that you might be able to stick this in a pipeline, get it to the port of Kitimat, and then take it off to Asia, where we can drive more Hummers to work in Shanghai. These are what the fracking operations look like in northern BC. They're huge, they're extraordinary. They are among the most water-intensive frack operations in the world. You have a variety of deposits there. You have shale gas, you have coal bed methane, and look at the river basins you also have there. The Mackenzie Basin is where most of all of this activity is taking place. And as Giles Wending mentioned last night, how many groundwater monitoring wells do you have up there? Less than half a dozen. Shameful. Not shameful, criminal. All right, so I mentioned the water demands of this, extraordinary. 2.4 million gallons of water used per frac. That's equivalent to water used by 20 to 40 people, or equivalent to 3 to 6 Olympic pools. But in British Columbia, you're using 3 times that amount. All right, you have these glorious plans to build all these LNG plants. In order to do this, you would have to drill another 50,000 wells in northern BC, and you've got 20,000 there right now. So that would be about 3,000 wells a year. This is all, again, according to David Hughes. That's 10 million gallons per frac, more water than the city of Calgary every year in perpetuity for the next 30 years. Or 150. Won't last that long. Here's what shale looks like, just so you know. Industry will tell you that, wow, isn't this a wonderful resource? Hello, my name is Talisman Terry, your friendly frackosaurus. I'm here to teach you about clean energy source called natural gas, blah, blah, blah. This resource, you only recover 20% of the methane. The pore spaces are 1,000 smaller than conventional gas. You will encounter radioactive materials, hydrogen sulfide, saline water, and high carbon dioxide content in these rock. Arthur Berman, who's one of the top petroleum experts from Houston, he says it, he puts it just right. He's an honest guy telling the truth about this god-awful resource. Oil companies have to make a big deal about shale plays because that is all that is left in the world. Let's face it, these are truly awful reservoir rocks, and that is why we waited until all more attractive opportunities were exhausted before developing them. It is completely unreasonable to expect better performance from bad reservoirs than from better reservoirs. And that's the truth about what your government is trying to do in this province. A dream that is built on lies. The big problem with fractures are this. They're nonlinear events. You cannot always control the fracking events in these rock formations. And these events, because you cannot control them, will connect to natural fractures, and these natural fractures will eventually go to the surface and connect to your groundwater or your surface water. Tony Ingraffia puts it best. Since the gas plays are typically overpressurized, and since the fracking process further increases the pressure in the rock mass, for a short period of time, it is possible that the fracking process could open up a pathway upwards to fresh water. And that's exactly what has happened in the Marcellus. It is exactly what has happened in Wyoming. It is exactly what has happened in Colorado and in Texas and in Alberta and in northern BC. And here in the Marcellus in Pennsylvania, where scientists have looked, where they have massively drilled, what they find is that the more you drill, the more methane you find in groundwater. And you find it 70 times higher in wells near active drilling zones. So all of this drilling is releasing the methane, and it is going to surface. And part of it has to do with leaky well casings. Every well bore into the earth becomes a pathway for methane leakage. So the more you frack, the greater the risk to aquifers and groundwaters from methane leaks, period. So your government has promised you this wonderful bridge to the future that will pay off your debts and make every British Columbian feel like a prince and princess. Just go to the industry, and industry always offers really great reality checks on this. Here's Ed Marin, a U.S. guy who specializes in mega projects, particularly LNG projects, and he finds it very interesting that 4 out of every 5 oil and gas mega projects today fail. . You need to think about the price argument. Damien talked a bit about this last night. Okay, we're going to grab this great Asian premium and I'll get rich. Well, you know, Putin and the Chinese have already changed that. They've already brought it down to $9 a unit, $1 below what is economic for this province. The revenue, you have this promise of $100 billion. Right now, you're not drilling much. You're not drilling much because the price of natural gas is low and the cost of production in northern BC are so high that the drilling boom up there is really come to a halt. Now look at your revenue sources. Look what has happened to natural gas since 2007. It's the gray bar. You're making less than $300 million a year from this. How the hell are you going to make $100 billion if right now you're making less than $300 million from natural gas production? It's not going to happen. And it's not going to happen because the financial arrangements made for natural gas in this province look like this. This is Cambridge Energy Associates, and they are ranking the royalty and rent formulas for various jurisdictions. In other words, when are you going to get the money from this resource when you take it out of the ground? And so there's two ways to do it. You either get the money up front and recognize that the resource is volatile and things change, and if you don't get it up front, you might not get it at all, or you do what Christy Clark has done and you agree, we'll take it at the end of the day. And how does Cambridge Energy Resources then rank that? As the riskiest approach to oil and gas production. Riskier than Texas, riskier than Alaska, riskier than Louisiana, Wyoming, even riskier than the tar sands, and we're pretty bad in the tar sands. In other words, you're giving it away, and you will earn nothing, and you will subsidize the production and extraction of this resource. And where does Christy Clark get her advice from? Gwen Morgan. Former CEO of Canada. This was the guy who was in charge of SNC-Lavalin while its executives were bribing officials around the world. Subsidies. This whole entire industry in British Columbia is subsidized. Royalties lowered, regulations reduced, improved road access paid by you, high-quality geoscience information for free, and free water. This is the government slide. I wish I could say I made up this cartoon. I didn't. So what are you paying? Well, you've paid $840 million in royalty credits for roads and pipelines, equivalent to 1,240 miles of road, 1,300 miles of pipe, all since 2004. Nearly $1 billion in subsidies to this industry. Plus, you want to build the Peace River Dam at a cost of $8 billion to fund the energy requirements of only one LNG project because they are so energy intensive. So how fucked up is that? And then Damien mentioned this little problem with the resource, all right? So here's what you produce in BC, all right? And you haven't paid much attention to it because it's not a tree and it's all taking place in northern BC. And most of you live so far away from it, you're like Albertans. You've never been to Fort McMurray. So most of you have probably never been to Peace River. So you're producing about 3.5 billion cubic feet of gas a day. One project alone, this one by Shell, needs 3.2 billion cubic feet a day. So one project, we eat up all of the province's entire production at this point in time. What has the National Energy Board approved in its wisdom? Said, well, don't worry. We want you to go to 14 billion cubic feet. Wait a minute, we're only producing 3 billion cubic feet. Well, that's okay. In their best case scenario, they said, well, you won't reach 10. Might not even reach 6. Where the hell is all this gas going to come from? The National Energy Board admits that Canada will become a net gas importer by 2017 and remain so thereafter. So will we be exporting gas to Asia while the rest of Canada freezes in the dark? In its reference case, the NAB suggests Canada will have no more than 4.5 billion cubic feet of export capacity by 2035, yet it has approved 14 billion cubic feet. Now, somebody has really seriously fucked up their math. And I can tell you it's not David Hughes. Because David Hughes is the guy that just told the state of California, your shale oil reserves aren't there. And the state this week admitted, you know what, David Hughes, you're right, you did the right calculations. All right, let me end with a story about Australia. Like British Columbians, Australians did not, they went into this shale gas boom and this coal bed methane boom and this LNG boom, and they've spent tens of billions of dollars on it. Most of the resource is offshore, but some of it is onshore. And it has resulted in land fragmentation like this for coal bed methane. And they said, look, no, we won't do any assessments, we won't do any baseline groundwater tests. Rural people, by the way, are expendable, so let's not worry about all this stuff. I mean, this is money, we're going to be wealthy, we're going to be prosperous, and what do they now find in the Condamine River? This is methane coming up through fractures in the river that farmers who farm by this river have never seen in the last 60 years. They've got methane coming up all over the place. The Australians have a very powerful movement called Lock the Gate. Lock the gate against these shale gas developers. But every day now they have headlines like this: Santos coal seam gas project contaminates aquifer. You have a proposal to put an LNG terminal in Campbell River. The company that is proposing this is based in Houston, Texas. It is called Quicksilver Resources. And what do Quicksilver Resources specialize in? They specialize in fracking coal seams. This is what they've done in Alberta. And they were part of a carpet bombing exercise that put 10,000 shallow frack jobs into coal seams in central Alberta in the last 10 years. With the result that many people, as Jessica Ernst will explain later today, can now set their tap water on fire. Now there's a marriage, right? Get your energy source and your water source all coming out of one tap. Here's what industry says. Because of the shallow depth of many CBM basins, the potential exists for a fracture going out of zone and affecting freshwater aquifers. Here's where your coal seams are. Why would you put an LNG terminal in Campbell River if you do not plan on fracking the hell out of all of your coal seams? You think of the salmon rivers that run over those coal seams. You think of the fresh water you enjoy on this island, which is a blessing and a gift. I found this master thesis. The complex deformational history of southwest British Columbia has resulted in the development of numerous faults and fractures, so faults and fractures all over the place that have the potential to connect near the surface sediments and bedrock aquifers, further complicating the local hydrogeological environment. This whole master thesis was based on the premise that the mining of coal bed methane would proceed on the island. You build a $5 billion terminal in Campbell River, you will frack the hell out of this landscape to keep that terminal going. So where do we go? There's so much to do. We all need this, fundamentally, and we'll feel much better using less energy. If we use less energy, we will abuse less water. We all need this, the national carbon tax. But fundamentally, we really need to do this. We need to defend water. And I don't mean being polite about it. If it takes civil disobedience, then it takes civil disobedience. Here's a question for each and every one of you. That's what it all boils down to. Hope has two beautiful daughters, and you'll meet one later this morning. Their names are Anger and Courage, and anger at the way things are, and courage to see that they do not remain the way they are. Thank you.
Our next presenter is Ingmar Lee. Much to say about Ingmar. He's an interesting guy. But among other things, at the age of 19, he began planting trees. And in the intervening time, he looks like he's about 35 or 40 now. He's planted more than 1 million trees himself, so he's done more for the planet than most of us. Ingmar had the experience of watching the devastation of the Nanaimo watershed by awful clear-cut logging, and that motivated him. He says it woke him up. He got mad and he got activated. He's participated in blockades, tree sits, demonstrations, and other acts of civil disobedience. But interestingly enough, recently Ingmar studied at UVic for over 7 years and acquired a degree in Asian and Environmental Studies in 2005, looking at the global ecological catastrophe. He has lived with his wife Krista and son Desmond in Pondicherry, India to study wild elephants for Krista's MSc degree. They saw the Indian elephants and all wonderful diversity of wildlife in that country living on the brink. They've moved to Bella Bella amongst the Heiltsuk people, and they are there, raised their children there. Their son Zephyr showed up 3 years ago. What I really want to say, because I don't get a chance to speak like this very often, is, and I presume this is a quote from Ingmar, with Harper at the helm, he is also disgusted to be Canadian. Here he is committed to doing whatever it takes, everything in his power, to halt the evil planet-killing agenda of our repulsive oil lackey Prime Minister, and our groveling oil lackey wannabe Premier. So to find out what he really thinks, please welcome Ingmar Lee.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out on this beautiful day in Courtenay, Comox. And first of all, as is proper, I should acknowledge and be grateful that I'm standing on the territory of the Comox First Nation. And I'm also been blessed to be welcomed and feel welcomed living in Heiltsuk territory in the Bella Bella area. I'd like to also thank June and the Council of Canadians and CUPE for making this possible, and all of my fellow speakers. Incredible privilege to speak with these people. And I'd also like to acknowledge our great leader, Elizabeth May. And could I ask you to give a standing ovation to Elizabeth May? So near where I live, just south of Bella Bella, there's a place called Namu, and there's been an archaeological dig there. And if I'm not mistaken, it's it's the oldest archaeological site in Canada. Shows 14,000 years of continuous human occupation on that landscape. People were living on this landscape before there were forests here. I think that's incredibly telling because with my wife Krista and I, we've did our final UVic paper. She's a science student, I was an art student. We did a joint interdisciplinary joint paper on culturally modified trees. I don't like the terminology culturally modified trees, but these are trees that are, it's just example of the sustainable use of forests that evolved with the human participation in the processes of the ecosystems. Around our area, we can see so many examples of where First Nations have, instead of like mowing down a tract of forest to plant different species like potatoes, and then all the trouble and difficulty of keeping those potatoes safe and protected from pests or enhanced so they grow faster or whatever, we see all these examples around our area where people just simply enhanced what was already growing there. Clam gardens, only recently being recognized by the archaeological scene as being archaeological sites, where up to 30% more clam production just by moving rocks, building a berm. The beach comes down. By removing a rock, you enhance some clam space, and from putting the berm there, you create a berm that brings the silt down and increases the area that can be clammed. Fish traps, where a rock wall is built. There's also rock work involved in clam gardens, but they're very distinct from fish traps, and quite often you can see fish trap, clam garden, fish trap, clam garden going up the beach. The fish traps, of course, the tide is up, the fish are swimming around, the tide goes out, they get trapped behind the rock berm, and then people just go and pick the fish up off the beach. Weirs. Yesterday morning, as I was driving around between the Philberg Lodge down there and here, thinking the talk was down there, I stopped by the Courtney River just to enjoy the view, and right in front of me I could see the little stubs of an ancient fish weir right on the Courtney River estuary. They're just right there to see. I'm sure that's what they are. And so this sort of thing. Now, the other thing that we see quite often, we're up there studying sandhill cranes. Krista's the brains and the science student. I'm the mule. I do the field work. I get there. I run the boat. And the sandhill cranes nest in the big bog complexes that are a feature of the geography of the BC Central Coast. But there's a fringe of forest around the waterfront of these, up to a kilometer before you sort of break into these bogs. And everywhere we went, we've been studying about 30 crane nests. The forests are full of these CMTs or shade trees or cultural trees where bark products, planks are taken off the trees. And there's examples of burn felling where you'll find a stump or trees that have a big burn cavity burnt out from inside. You see them around here wherever you can find an old growth forest around here. Difficult. But there's many examples where you'll see the burn cavity inside the tree, and it's my contention that a faller would go out and make a little smolder fire and maybe get the fire going in a few different cedar trees, and gradually excavate by careful burning out the cavity, and ultimately, when the tree's ready to go, instead of standing at the bottom of it and risking your life, you're sitting somewhere eating berries a couple of tree lengths away when the tree goes over, and then you go and get your wood products from that. Many, many examples of that. And we can prove it because quite often we'll find a bunch of burned out cavities and then a stump with no log. So one of the other things that I've seen from the peeling, if a bark peel, like in a post-fire second understory forest that comes up, for example, in Cathedral Grove under a fir forest where there's been historic fires, you get a very tall, straight cedar poles reaching up to get to the sunlight. And when the people peeled the bark, you could get a very long peel, often 60 feet tall. And instead of doing a horizontal cut at the base of the peel, they would do a lenticular cut. And then what happens is over the cat face, the wound of the tree, there's a healing callus that begins to roll across the wound. And that callus grows every year. In fact, as part of our project, we were doing increment coring where you could drill through the healing lobe and then count the rings so we could get temporal information when these trees were peeled. And on the Brooks Peninsula, where our study was based, we found trees that we dated to the 1700s that were being peeled, by the way. But anyway, this healing callus would grow up. You'd have a round base tapering up to a point 60 feet up, an absolutely straight cedar pole. Huggable size was when they were peeled. So now they're 80 years later. When I stand back and look at that, I see a canoe. These were grown canoes, is my contention, and it's an example of the long-term vision of sustainable forest use that we just don't see here today. And one final thing that I'd like to say about my understanding of the First Nations, and I don't want to presume this stuff, but we hear a lot of stereotypes from the written record, which only goes back 170 years or so, or from Captain Cook days, of what was encountered. And we need to remember that the diseases that were brought by Columbus and things like that just spread across the country in great pandemics, and that the people that Cook met out here had already suffered terrible epidemics of diseases and losses in their communities. So, but one example that I look at to show that these weren't warring communities, as is the common stereotype, cannibalism, all this sort of thing, is the enduring cultural unity that you can see from California to Alaska, the arts. That's what remains. And to have that degree of, I don't want to say uniformity, but instantly recognizable as West Coast First Nations art, that suggests to me an incredibly interactive culture up and down this whole coast. So fast forward 150 years, I'll just quickly go through the Vancouver Island stats. Logging started 150, 160 years ago at South Island, gradually increased in speed. Took them 120 years to log the first half of Vancouver Island. The next half has been logged in 30 years. And what a lot of people aren't understanding is the absolute voracious cut of the post-primeval logging, I call it, like second growth logging, third growth logging their way down through the timber profile, starting at the biggest and best. As always with logging, you always go after the biggest, fattest, best, most luxuriant luxe trees and gradually work your way up till you get into the trees where you can get like a 2x4 out of it. And the second pass is logging its way down through the timber profile to the date today where they're logging trees that I planted. Little pecker poles, you get a 2x4 out of it. 12% of Vancouver Island protected, 6% of that's above the tree line, rock and ice. So, a big part of my heartbreak on Vancouver Island, we fought and fought to protect our final watersheds like up at Clasquiche and East Creek on the west coast of Vancouver Island. We lost and lost and lost, and now we're fighting over single trees like DL33 down the road here, the last tract of primeval forest on Crown land in the Douglas fir forest, decimated, couldn't stop it. So I've moved up to Bella Bella, where we're still, for the most part, surrounded by primeval forests. There's serious issues up there too. I'd like to just touch on the Vancouver Island marmot, now extinct. You'll hear the story that, no, we've learned how to breed the marmots and it's all good. We've got our breeding laboratory up at Mount Washington here. But the problem is that there's no wild-born marmots anymore. Every year there's lab-bred marmots are being released into their former colonies, but they're not breeding up there. They're just falsely introduced. How long can we sustain a species like that when they won't breed in their natural habitat? They're only breeding in laboratories. So I'm calling the Vancouver Island marmot extinct. That was Canada's most endangered species, and nothing was done to protect them. And I would absolutely clearly state, from looking at that area, logging caused. I don't want to use up all my time explaining how I come to that thing. Couple of things about Fort McMurray, if I can move on. We've had some woofers coming up to our place that had worked at the tar sands, and there's a few things that weren't brought up about the ecological footprint of the tar sands and the human issues that are going on there. There's thousands and thousands of people working up there in these giant camps, mostly men. I don't know if Andrew has the stats on how many people are actually up in the area in camps there, but 40,000. Now, my understanding is that these 40,000 people aren't housed in Fort McMurray. They're housed in Newfoundland, they're housed in British Columbia, Calgary, Edmonton, and after they're done their shift, they all just get flown home. Or they get flown home for Christmas, it's on the company. And that's an enormous ecological footprint. I could be a vegan, I could be riding a bicycle, I could be living off grid, but if I take one flight to Toronto, I might as well be driving a Humvee for, to every day, because the ecological footprint of all that flying is enormous. So I just had to bring that in. Some of these guys, there was one guy he took the environmental studies program at Comox College and got a job in the tar sands working for Suncor. His job, he went out to pull the ducks out of the tailings ponds. And, they have boats in those tailings ponds. Now, I run, an outboard, and, it has cooling water that goes through it. So I don't know how that sludge, what kind of engine life they're getting out of it. But, just to imagine going out on those tar ponds in a boat, absolutely unbelievable. And when I look at Google Earth and the imagery, those enormous tailings lakes, somebody mentioned, are all right along the Athabasca River. And I came across this book, and I'd like to read you a quote from it. It's called The Silence of the North. And The Silence of the North is the memoirs of a woman called Olive Friedrichsen, and she was the wife of a fur trapper back in the 1920s. And back in those days, Fort McMurray, there was no road to Fort McMurray. It was just a fort in the bush, like a Hudson Bay Company fort, I think. And so she describes, I'd like to quote this alarming passage which documents a massive destructive ice jam which tears down the Athabasca River, creating destruction and havoc right into Fort McMurray. I'm quoting from Olive Fredrickson. All of a sudden we heard a thunderous noise upriver, and looking that way we could see a pile of ice like a small mountain springing up in midstream. I'd lived along the Athabasca long enough to know what that meant. The river ice had started to move, and a jam was forming in the rapids a half mile above. I knew the awesome power of that ice and knew we needed to get back to Fort McMurray without losing a second. We were in no actual danger, for if the ice cut us off on the trail, we could climb the tar sands hills. Now, I just want to point out, back in 1920, that was tar sands. That's the terminology. All this oil sands terminology, it's bullshit. Tar sands is what it's always been called, okay? Now, Damien was asking us to not use the terminology liquid natural gas. It's liquid fracked gas, right? So we should always use the terminology tar sands. And I'm going to also ask you to to add some terminology to your vocabulary, your spiel later on too. But this is tar sands. So we climbed the tar sand hills back from the river. But those hills were brushy and rough, and that could mean a very hard hike, especially with the baby. Walter was, it's their trapper husband, wasn't as concerned as I was, for he'd never lived close to a big North Country river, but he took my word for it, and we started to hurry back. We had not gone a quarter mile when the jam began moving slowly down, and with blasts like the crash of a cannon, the 3-foot thick ice ahead of it, where we were, started to break and go. The Athabasca was over half a mile wide there, but there was no room in the channel for that huge moving mountain of ice. The whole groaning, cracking mass ground and shoved its way along with unbelievable force, tearing trees out by the roots, gouging away tons of riverbank, and where the shore was low, pushing onto the land, flattening brush and tipping trees in a smashed and tangled rubble. And I'll skip through a bit, but back at Fort McMurray, we met a sight that was hard to believe. A huge ridge of ice was piling up on a 3-acre island in the middle of the river, plowing and churning trees, earth, rock, until the whole island was ground away, and so on. You can get the picture. It eventually took out the sawmill right in Fort McMurray. You know, this is going on right beside all these tar pits, or these tailings ponds. Now, we've had this issue about, you know, the BC coast being an oil-free coast up north. You know, we've got all these tankers going through Vancouver as it is through and this is the terminology change. Some people call it the Enbridge pipeline, some people call it the Kinder Morgan pipeline. Back when I first started getting activated on the Enbridge pipeline, I called it the Gordon Campbell pipeline because he was its chief proponent back in those days. Now, these are the Stephen Harper pipelines. Let's change our terminology and name it after its biggest proponent, so that when the disasters start happening, we can call it not the Exxon Valdez oil slick, but the Stephen Harper oil slick. It's Stephen Harper that's destroying our coast. Currently, there is an oil tanker plying up and down our protected waters of the Inside Passage. There's only one that I'm aware of. It's called the Nathan E. Stewart is the tug, and it is what you call a pusher tug, and it fits into a notch in the back of a 10,000-ton oil barge. And the Nathan E. Stewart and DBL 50 are owned by a Texas-based company, Kirby Marine, and Kirby Marine is the same company that just had one of their tugs, pusher tug and tanker go aground in Galveston Bay, and it's now polluted the entire Galveston Bay area around Texas. This is the same company, the same ships, and the same tonnage of oil tanker that is currently plying back and forth between Washington State and Alaska, and often goes right past Bella Bella. I've been tracking it on AIS, and I'd like to block that thing and send it back where it came from. I don't think it'll be that much trouble. Maybe people can help me, but I would ask for people to get on their AIS systems and start tracking the Nathan E. Stewart and DBL 55. I have questions. Who approved that? Like, what application was that? Is there can I get a Freedom of Information package that shows the factotum, the government factotum that gave permission that they could run this oil tanker? That tanker got in serious trouble off of Cape Fairweather, Alaska 2 years ago, where it ran into an enormous storm. It got 2 30-foot waves right down its stacks. It went dead in the water. It drifted aimlessly at sea and had to get rescued by the giant tugboats of the U.S. Coast Guard. And it so happens that on YouTube, I've managed to find a video that was taken from the pilot house. The pilot house on the tug is on a great big long tower, so it can see over the front of the barge, and it fits into a notch. And you can just see this enormous seas and this huge tankers just rocking and rolling and smashing, and waves blowing right over the bow and smashing right into the tug. It was incredible. Now, that is a 10,000-ton capacity tanker, which just by coincidence happens to be the mandated limit of the responsibilities of what our world-class marine response service that we have here in British Columbia. Our much touted by, you know, I guess he's the finance minister now, Joe Oil Liver is what I call him. always touting the great response system we have. Well, the WCMRC, Western Canada Marine Response Corporation, is owned, just by happenstance, by great tar sands producer Imperial Oil, Shell Canada, Chevron, and Suncor. And they have a monopoly mandate to clean up all the oil, any spills for the entire British Columbia coast, and their mandate is to be able to respond to a 10,000-ton spill. Well, I've seen their little container full of absorbent pads up at Shearwater. 10,000-ton spill is nothing compared to the 300,000-ton Afromax, Supermax tankers that they have slated to, a literal traffic jam coming into, the Kitimat or Vancouver, with the other Stephen Harper pipelines. It's incredible. So I'd ask people to help keep your eye on that boat. Watch for it. The Nathan E. Stewart and DBL 55. We got to stop that. It offers nothing to us in Canada. It doesn't even stop in Canada. Just uses our water and our protected inside passage. Now, what are we going to do about this? Okay, I'm a great skeptic of our farcical and corrupt excuse that we've got for democracy here, and I'm sorry to have to say this for our parliamentarian here, but I admire Elizabeth because I know that you're not going to change anything through due process, but you are changing hugely just by exploiting the system against itself, and I'm so delighted that you're there. So please don't be offended. But I was involved in a few Green Party, in the BC Green Party when Gordon Campbell first came to power. His first election, he got somewhere around 30% of the vote. But the second election, the Campbell government won in British Columbia 77 of 79 seats, a virtual 100% of the power. Now, but they only got 30% of the vote. That's 30% of the 50% of eligible voters that voted. And I'm not dissing the people that didn't vote because, I do vote because but it's so futile. It's so hopeless. Like, it's so corrupt and farcical. It's just not worth your time. It's a waste of time. Now, HarperCon has a 24% mandate. 24% of eligible Canadian voters, that's the kind of mandate that this oil lackey has to govern our country with 100% of the power. That is wrong. We're not going to get anywhere through due process. We can, you can't vote for Trudeau. He's the tar sands lackey. He's been all over that. You can't vote for the Trudeau government. I haven't heard Mulcair's stance. I haven't heard him say anything about the BC Stephen Harper pipelines, but you look at Krusty Clack, she's just itching to approve these pipelines. She's just itching and working on it behind the scenes. You know that she wants these pipelines, and these phony conditions that she's talking about that are all touted by the corporate media and all that, they are going to be surmountable by the unlimited money of the big oil. The Adrian Dix loss, because of that he changed his position on the Kinder Morgan Stephen Harper pipeline. Now, what that's saying is that NDP members were so outraged that Adrian Dix was bad-mouthing the Kinder Morgan pipeline that they went and voted for Krusty Clack. That's a crock. And it's shameful that the NDP has gone along with that. Like, you even hear Horgan talking about that mistake, That's outrageous that that's been allowed to happen. I like John Horgan. I've butted heads with him. He was the MLA for Langford when we were having our tree sit in Bear Mountain, which was at the time, and probably still is, the single largest destroyer of Canada's most endangered ecosystem, which is the Garry Oak ecosystem. We fought them there for a year, got taken down by a 100-member RCMP SWAT team, and the millions of dollars that involved. And Horgan, you know, when asked to comment about the Bear Mountain tree sit, which went on for a year, and it was, you know, we were the largest newsmaker in Victoria. We had constant banner hangs, and we just embarrassed the hell out of them. Horgan said, well, you know, I'm all for the Bear Mountain development. Well, you know, that was a bit of a mistake, but I actually wrote to John Horgan a few times and encouraged him to run for the NDP. But John Horgan is making the same mistake that Carol James made. He's waffling and wishy-washy and sitting on the fence on the Kinder Morgan pipeline. I remember Carol James and her yellow light over the Enbridge thing, you know, can't give a green light, can't give a red light, we just have to give a yellow light to the Enbridge. Because, you know, on the coast, her MLA there, Gary Coons, was obviously against the pipeline and the tankers and all that, but she had another MLA further up the road that was for it. So, like, it was just that kind of lack of leadership, lackadaisical, milquetoast, lame duck leadership that got, you know, that was the end of her. And I just hope that John Horgan, you know, recognizes the real will of the people of British Columbia and, you know, comes out against the pipeline firmly and decisively. So there's one other politician that I have to mention, and that is our single Green MLA in the legislature, Dr. Andrew Weaver. Now, Andrew Weaver has, I've got a bit of a history about him. I ran for the MLA in Victoria Beacon Hill when I was living there, and during an election a while back, and Andrew Weaver robocalled every voter in Victoria Beacon Hill, and we have a recording of that robocall if you want to hear it. My name is Andrew Weaver. I'm a Nobel Prize-winning climatologist who's shared the Nobel Prize with all the writers of the International Panel on Climate Change. And I'm asking you to vote for Gordon Campbell because of his great green leadership and stuff like that. Now, this is our green MLA. This, you know, he robocalled every single voter in Beacon Hill, and you know, it didn't work anyway. The MLA, their candidate didn't win, but that gave me a problem. And as I found out later, his UVic department had won a grant just 6 months previous for the tune of $90 million. And I guess that was the price, you know, you got to come out stumping for the Campbell regime. Now recently, Andrew Weaver has come out stumping for the David Black dirty oil refinery in Kitimat. Well, hello, you build a dirty oil refinery in Kitimat, you need a pipeline to get the dirty oil from Alberta to Kitimat. So therefore, Andrew Weaver is stumping for the Enbridge pipeline. So, I mean, I'm sorry. I've written to him and complained, and he's argued and justified, and I feel like we need to get rid of that if we're going to have a Green Party in BC. But frankly, my feeling is if you think we're going to change this kind of bullshit through our existing farcical and corrupt processes of democracy, we better think again. And I look around, and I've traveled, and I get my feelings about where the public opinion is at through, you know, driving taxi. When I went to university, I drove taxi for 7 years. Traveling around the world, and I sincerely believe that the progressive, green-thinking people who care about this planet, that want a better future for their grandchildren, we are a critical mass in this world, and it's these corrupt political processes that are keeping us down. And I think we're at a critical mass, and people are extremely furious and extremely upset and ready to act, but they still believe that there's going to be some recourse through due process, and there isn't. And what we're seeing is these bubbling ups of discontent. There's Idle No More, Occupy Wall Street, all kinds of these uprisings and seething unrest that is just bubbling below the surface. We see right now with the teacher strike, and I encourage you teachers, let's have a general strike. Like, come on, right now it's the perfect time. It's the perfect time to go out for a general strike. We're coming up to summertime. Trying to have a general strike in the fall, it's too cold, people can't turn out, it's raining, all that sort of thing. We need a general strike right now. I think that would be, what's happening is people need a catalyst to act. We're already pissed off, we're already energized, we're already active. Look at the turnout here on a beautiful Saturday. It's incredible. We're ready. And I say that we better realize, and I'm 54 years old, I've got my beautiful children. I'm not going to take it. I will fight that pipeline to the death. And I think that all of us who are aging, we have to get as much mileage as we can out of our lives, but let's get our mileage out of our death as well. And go out there and stop this nonsense. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ingmar.
And I am so happy that we have technical problems putting me on the same level as you. I'm very ordinary. Very ordinary. I will not gag or settle my lawsuit out of court for money. I'm not doing it for money. And I stand alone. Lots of people are group people. Yes, we are strong in groups. But some of us are not group people, like me. Some of us like to work in very quiet conditions with maybe one or two people. We are not group people. And people like me working individually are amassing around the world to something I can't even describe it. It's incredible. So groups are very important, the individuals too. And I believe the reason the groups are pushing so hard to keep us all in groups is because the corporations know how much power we have. I'm still trying to figure out where this belongs. Can everybody hear me at the back? Okay, good.
You gotta move over.
Sorry?
You gotta move over a bit. You're standing in front of your thing.
I'm a very obedient Albertan woman.
Single.
Single. Never get asked out because, well, I have many enemies. So, let's proceed. Synergy, what is it? It's something very evil. It is the most evil thing I have encountered in my lifetime. It's a definition that I found that describes it very well. Synergy means behavior of whole systems unpredicted by the behavior of their parts taken separately. I'm an individual. The corporations, the synergized environmental groups, social justice groups, the politicians do not want people like me doing anything, or like you doing anything, because we're unpredictable by ourselves. In my community, shales, sands, and coals are being fracked. Wells are horizontal, deviated. Coal bed methane, slant, vertical, deep, shallow, ultra shallow. That's my home. Oh, another question. Let's see how obedient you are. Can we turn some of the lights down, I think? I'll keep going. And some right into our drinking water aquifers. Now, to the camera guys, I'm very nervous, so if I move around too much, just yell at me because I can handle it, and I'm very obedient, and I'll go to where you need me to be.
We can't see
Right
it now.
into our drinking water aquifers. So this is data, this is publicly available data on Alberta's public water well database. That's a hydrocarbon well data by Antenna. Nobody's talking about this except one or two incredibly courageous journalists, one you heard earlier, and myself. Why is everybody quiet? This is the most shallow perforations from that well. In October 2003, Antenna drilled this well in secret in my community. This is a part of a preface before I start my story. And this is from their data. It says, the condition of the water in that aquifer, gas present, oil present, no. Isn't that interesting? Because after they fracked all these wells where the drinking water is, hundreds of them, suddenly people's water wells got very contaminated with methane, and it was all because of nature. or us dirty water well owners and bacteria? Well, Encana says right here, operations of perforations was to obtain coal bed methane production. Nobody's talking about this. This data is public. I found it. You can find it. Some of the examples of the unconventional: CBM, tight gas, tight oil, shale gas. It's not just shale gas. You have CBM here, they will frack you up and down your coast. I believe they get a royalty break of what, $50,000 a well, trying to get the business in. This is a slant rig in my community, and they were to frack, this later got fracked by above the basic groundwater protection. I'm happy not to be seen. You've all had a good look at, you've all had a good look at me though, right? Pardon me? Oh. What about filming just the slides?
Can do, but.
Can we compromise? I think you want better slides, right? Okay. What is fracking? Fluid is pumped into a wellbore to create enough pressure to crack. The new fracking is massive pressure. It's new. One stage vertical, not just deep, multi-stage horizontal. Synergy Alberta. Note their logo. Round and round and round and round. Task force, round tables, talk, 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 talk. And we'll frack around you and you'll never know. Because you're so busy talking. Synergized environmental groups and other groups in Canada wrongly define unconventional fracking. Only ask for a band study on the deep horizontal multi-stage. Many people have already been harmed by all the other kinds, including me. My lawsuit is about the vertical. Quebec, most of the new shale wells leaking methane. They ordered the companies to fix the leaks. The companies couldn't. They failed. Talisman said, oh, don't worry about it. That's common. Most of them are vertical, shallow. Ontario is going to be vertical, shallow. Here, shallow, vertical. Why are environmental groups helping industry mislead? Why? We need truth now. It's only one type. This is from the Council of Canadians' big book on Fractivist Toolkit. I am not a fractivist. I am not an activist. I am not an environmentalist. I am first and foremost a Canadian, very concerned. I'm a businesswoman, and I work in the oil and gas industry. I'm a scientist. This is a regulator document on what is unconventional fracking. They show a shallow vertical methane well. They show the deep multi-stage horizontal right here. They show waste injection. They show perfect casing that we are told will protect our drinking water and us. They don't tell us about the many holes they blast into the casing right where the fresh water is. The blue dotted line is what they call the basic groundwater protection. That's where we get our drinking water from. They do not show that companies are fracking here, and Canada fracked right there in my community. They do angle wells like this with slant rigs. They go down vertical and then do a diagonal. The deviated drilling has 50% more gas leakage. So why are we being made to chase our tails? Now look at this dog. It's the synergy symbol. Round and around and around we go. Synergy is largely controlled by Encana, CAP, and the regulator in Alberta. This is the energy regulator representative, Darcy Allen, Encana. This is the CAP representative, Shell. Do you want to go round tables with them? I don't. Since I began speaking out, they have been chasing me ruthlessly. I have never been a popular person. That's why I'm not married. That's why I don't get dates except by Cupid. But suddenly, I spoke out. I resigned from Encana, and I'm popular. I'm being chased like crazy. Now I start my story with historic records. It's a very tiny part of the story. If you want the full story, you'll have to go online. A little bit of data. A lot of the science I had to take out. Gas present in our water wells? No. This is the actual data. These records were pulled from the database in 2010. This is 1987. I blew it up for you. Oh, I guess we have, we didn't check into that. Well, that says no. You have to believe me, like you believe your politicians here. By the way, I will upload the PDF slides to my website once I'm done here so you have access to them. My legal team looked at 2,300 such records. Most did not have methane present in the water wells before the new experimental brute force fracking. Vertical, deviated, slant rigs, vertical down, diagonal, deep horizontal, shallow horizontal, commingled, which is mixing everything up. Husky had such a serious problem with gas migration, they did a big study. These are their conclusions. Big problem, expensive. What do oil companies not like to do? On us. They love to spend our tax dollars on them. They don't like to spend their money on us. And they can't stop it completely. And they define it. Gas from outside the production and surface casing of oil and gas wellbores. Many people think you only get methane migration from gas wells. You also get this from oil wells. So where they want to frack the west coast of Newfoundland, they were telling the people there, oh, you don't have to worry, it's oil we're fracking for. You're not going to have gas migration here. Big lie. And they can rarely figure out where it's coming from. A diagram showing the leakage outside the wellbore. This is where you can contaminate groundwater. Almost half of the wells tested had this problem. Our big oil and gas lobby group that likes to synergize people like me, they did a big report with the Saskatchewan Research Council, Pan-Canadian, precursor to Encana, lots of other companies. This is such a big problem. They titled their paper Migration of Methane into Groundwater from Leaking Energy Wells. They did the same thing my legal team did, but they looked at 24,000 historic records. They got the Alberta regulator to do it for them. Before oil and gas, any kind of oil and gas, only 0.07% had a gas present that could be methane. After oil and gas began, but before the new brute force fracking, 0.17%, the same that my legal team found before the new brute force fracking in my community on a smaller scale. Before oil and gas, water wells with methane. After. You don't need to be a scientist. I bought my place in 1998. I love beauty. I love water. 2002, Council of Canadian, the Ministers of Environment across the country, and Dr. John Sherry. Who knows that name? One person? 2, 3? Yeah. Well, guess what he just did? Well, he already did what he just did in 2002, 12 years ago. He's a hydrologist at the University of Guelph. I went to University of Guelph. He wrote a chapter for this report. They looked at some of the impacts to our water from the oil and gas industry moving into the unconventionals. We have 600,000 abandoned hydrocarbon wells in Alberta alone. That was written by Dr. Sherry in the report that was written, and they don't know the state of those seals. They tell us, don't worry, go home. They protect your groundwater. And when fracking comes, the cumulative impacts are incredible underground. And they also said industry's future impacts could be immense on quality and quantity, and they said Canada needs baseline monitoring and data collection now. It did not happen. This is the chapter 4 by Dr. John Sherry. And he says here, number 4, laws and regulations for groundwater protection are often weak and unenforced in most of Canada. We knew that in 2002. Huge gaps between the actual science used in policy and decision making. And Canada didn't care. They started to experiment with my community and me and the pregnant women and children in about 2001 in secret. These wells listed here, these are all completed in where the freshwater zones are. In 2001, the most shallow perforation I could find was 100.5 meters. In 2004, they perforated and fractured repeatedly right into the community's drinking water supply. The regulators knew, everybody knew, Alberta Health knew, except the community did not know. I didn't know any of this stuff. I was very busy with my business. I had a very successful business. I never sought out a client. They sought me out, and I picked my clients. I said no to many. But my life fracked began with noise. incredible noise. I didn't even know what it was. Drove me crazy. It sent my 2 Border Collie Jack Russell dogs to pacing in the house. You imagine Jack Russell Border Collies pacing. It's pretty bad. Lucky for me, my neighbor's water well went bad because of wells by Encana nearby, and he said, Jess, they want to do more, you better get your water well tested. I did, I asked Encana, please come test my water well. Now, on Encana's website, they say, oh, Jessica Ernst, she's uncooperative, she won't let us test her water well. Well, there's the data. It says there, Encana. I blew up the important part, appearance clear. They did not say there was visible gas. This is before Encana fracked the aquifer. So, 2003, Encana drills this well. 2004, March, they fracked repeatedly into our freshwater aquifers. 2 of them, these are 3 water wells that went bad first. Mine's over here. That's the data I showed you at the beginning. This is the Energy Well Bore data. Now, I don't like it when they say 1-stage vertical well. So why are they saying only the deep horizontals have this big impact and all these multi-stages and, oh, that's what we need a ban on, but everything else is okay? This is 1 shallow vertical well into a community's drinking water supply. 24 zones, perforated, fractured, all of them. That's multi-stage to me. Or maybe we should call it many-stage, or many perfs. Big impact. We still do not know what chemicals were injected. I have been trying for years to find out. Water wells start to go bad, and Canada investigates itself like companies do all over the world. They say, oh, we're innocent, but the local water well driller, oh, he did it. So did the regulators say that? Now, again, I was busily working away and trying to train my 2 wild Jack Russell pacing Border Collie dogs. And people in the community came to me for help because they were getting approached by an Encana landman to sign in a document that was not compliant with Guide 56. They were trying to get a blanket approval. It's a massive surface cumulative impact too. You heard Mr. Nikiforuk say carpet bombing. I call it flea-bitten dog drilling. I love dogs. So I said to them, yes, it's an illegal document, there's a manager's name, I'll call him up. And I did. This is what he said to me. Ah, Jess, wink, wink, wink. You're working for us up north. You're doing consultation for us. And Encana was one of my best clients. And he says, if we get them all to sign, we don't have to consult with them. I said, you gotta be kidding. Albertans are the most supportive of oil and gas anywhere in the world. Tell them what you're doing. And I'm sure they'll all sign. Okay, we'll have an open house. The very next week, the same landman, same document, same lies. So I took my 2 nervous dogs and went for a walk and realized my life was going to now veer into hell. I had bought myself 50 acres of high prairie paradise. It's beautiful here, but I love the spiritual space and power of the high prairies. There's nothing like it anywhere on earth for me to breathe. And I thought I had it made. And I was walking down the path to hell knowing I had to give it all up. I resigned. How could I work for a company lying to my community and me? So Encana holds an open house only because probably I had resigned. And they ran around the day after I resigned in writing trying to figure out how to fire me. I was told by teammates there. And I said, oh, well, that's kind of funny, too late. Can't fire somebody who's already gone. But they did a very evil thing. They promised us, they looked us in the eye. This is half a year after they fracked our drinking water supply. They said, we would never, oh no, we're gonna be way deep down below, like the multi-stage deep horizontal fracking. Way down there, no. We would never do such a terrible thing as frack your drinking water supply or anywhere near it. And they did the synergy thing. They gave a little bit of money to one tiny part of the community. This divides and conquers. And this gets the community to do Encana's dirty work for them and the regulators. They abused me mercilessly, trying to get me to be quiet. They didn't care about their water. They were worried about the $150,000 promise. That's coming here. That is coming here and has already started here. It's already started in the Yukon. Thank you. We don't have men like that in Alberta. Was it a man? We don't have men like that in Alberta. Well, maybe one or two. I haven't met them yet. Oh, I've met a couple, I suppose. I shouldn't exaggerate. And our water tower blew up. I have a private water well. The community relies on a concrete cistern. The worker was seriously injured. Investigation says accumulation of gases. We were told it was a propane torch. There's the old water tower. There's the new. It's now underground. And Canada promised, did not yet give the $150,000. This cost the community almost $700,000. You're very good at math here. In other parts of Canada, there's a long silence. You got it right away. My water, you're not very good at taking compliments. You laugh. You should say, oh, thank you. Whistling taps like a train coming, blowing gas. Incredibly painful. Well, you already heard all that. I don't have to say it again. Soaps and shampoos, though, stop making sense. I live in Canada. I thought we had unlimited fresh water. Yes, we have to use it wisely. I knew that. None of this struck me as anything happening to the water. I thought it was me or the plumbing. It wasn't until my dogs backed away from freshly poured water in revulsion that I knew. And I started to do a lot of digging and research. This is my water after fracking with the lights down. Can you see that? In Canada's test that they say I'm not cooperative on and that they already did, 2003, clear. I knew some geologists that did gas migration work. They came and looked. They said, this is really, really bad. You're living in danger. One of them loaned me a professional methane detector in my home, where I lived with my loved ones, my home, not a compressor station, not an LNG plant, not a tanker that's going to blow up in the ocean, my home. The noise continues. The regulator matches in Canada's non-compliance with a directive change. I catch them. I send out a warning email to a bunch of people. I had started a frack news list by that time. I dash off to the Yukon to warn them, the First Nations up there, about coal bed methane. And I come home to a letter from the regulator, and I thought, oh, I'm going to get regulations. I believed we had regulations. We had best in the world. I believed we had regulators. I worked in this industry. They conned me. I have 2 degrees. I come home to a letter banishing me from energy regulation. And Canada fracks the aquifers, and I get punted out. Here's the letter. Criminal threats will not be tolerated. Here's one of the men in Alberta that I would surely not ask me out on a date, Mr. Jim Reid. We are deciding how best to work with the Attorney General of Alberta and the RCMP. They did not, however, fingerprint me, or press charges, or throw me in jail. This was to intimidate. They knew what Encana had done. They knew I was digging because I had uncovered the non-compliance with the noise. They were trying to scare me into the good obedience of the typical Albertan. Don't you dare dig and find out what else Encana did. A neighbor just about fainted when she saw this letter. I looked at it and went, ooh, they are hiding something really bad. The noise is nothing compared to what I am going to find out. Here's the, so I asked for clarification, because in Canada, this is actually a fantastic part of my lawsuit, because this is the charter violation, freedom of expression. So I wrote a letter saying under what law did I get judged a criminal without a trial, no hearing? And this is how serious they took my banishment. This here says refused by, what do you call that? The guy on the other end. The ERCB refused my mail. Refused by addressee. That's what's the Canada Post. Wow. Yes, I looked at that and went, oh boy, this road to hell is going to be interesting. Don't forget, I'm a scientist. Now, while I was in the Yukon, there were some really interesting quotes in newspapers, and a journalist in Edmonton wanted to meet me. She came down. In the meantime, I got my lab tests on the methane in the water. The data arrived the day they came. They interviewed me, photographed my water, and my banishment, refusal of my letter, my asking justification, was in my mailbox today. This was on the front page of the Edmonton Journal. And Mr. Nikifork said it perfectly. A whoopsie. I don't think the regulator was planning on that. They were trying to make me quiet, right? And Canada has a technical briefing. They promise water if we lose our water supply. It's a lie. The government knew they had screwed us. There's many more people than me. I'm just one. Promised safe alternate water now and into the future, regardless of whether nature did it or not. It's in the Hansard. So March 3rd, the government finally comes marching down, but that's just because we went to the legislature and tests my water. They're horrified by the level of methane in their water. And the guy looks around and he says, oh, you don't have cattle? No, I don't have cattle. Well, you're to blame for the methane because you don't use enough water. And 3 days later, isn't that good? That's Alberta science, sir. We have, don't forget, the best in the world. And it's moving into BC, so you better get ready. 3 days later, we have an emergency meeting with the Minister of Environment, his hydrogeological staff, Deputy Minister, Assistant Deputy Minister, they were all there. I took the report proving that Encana had broken the law and fracked our aquifers and wanted to show it to the Minister of Environment, Guy Baudelaire, and he turned his body from me and did a 5-year-old. That's best in the world regulations. Regulator. So this is where the water tower blew up. That's my place. These red dots, these are all shallow vertical wells fracked where the freshwater zones are. Why is the world not talking about this? Why are the environmental groups not screaming about this? Why is it me all by myself? The black gets better. These are conventional wells. And we have deeper, deviated horizontals, and we have deep horizontals and shallow and all mixed up. This is about 6 miles around my place. Flea-bitten dog drilling. They're all up here, where they promise us still to this day, they won't. The government, they tested 3 water wells at Rosebud. They can fingerprint like the RCMP can a bank robber in a bank. They fingerprint the bank, they fingerprint the robber, they fingerprint the 10 outside that are innocent, and they can figure out who was in the vault. They can do that with gas and water. Guilty, Encana. 2006, they knew. They told no one, not even me. And I was trying to get this information. It took me 2 years, lots of money via freedom of information, lots of fighting. Some of the chemicals, there's no time to go through it all because we have lunch coming. Accidental chromium, Aaron Brockovich's fame. They found it in a monitoring well in the hamlet. They didn't tell anybody. Some of the chemicals in my water, evidence of petroleum distillates, they gel with things like naphthalene and kerosene and diesel. The chromium went up by a factor of 45, an alcohol, and phthalates. The same phthalates as one found in a well in Wyoming and Dimmock. This is Encana's respect to the community. They say they take protection of groundwater very seriously. They do not. This is in the pouring rain. It does rain in Alberta every once in a while. The methane in our water, 30 to 66 milligrams per liter. In that Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers study in the 90s, they stated 1 milligram per liter puts you at risk of explosion if the water passes a confined space in your home. Like a pipe, a water tank. If your house is really environmentally responsible, you're not in a good, you probably want to start drilling holes in the walls of your house. Yeah. Some of the historic records, gas present in my water, no. And in the CAP study, most of the water wells were below 0.05. I see the camera guys are moving around. I'm sorry guys, but this is really hard for me. These kind of things, I'm not one of these, I'm not a presenter. It's just really hard to stay still. So we go back to my banishment, the interrogation of me, the red guy. That's the ERCB lawyer, Rick McKee. And that's me. I have a new digital camera, it's great. But he was now trying to get evidence after the fact. 6 months later, I was still talking. They were trying to intimidate me some more. It was terrifying. It was an interrogation like McCarthy days. It went on for hours. I was terrified. I still wake up with nightmares. I'm not married to some great cowboy in Alberta who's going to protect me from these bullies. I stole this off the internet, this diagram. But he admitted on tape, by this time I trusted nobody anymore, so I asked if I could have the meeting taped, and he admitted, oh, they never considered me a threat. I'm just some middle-aged, ordinary Canadian woman. You take away the water. They did a big study. There's lots more to this story, but there's no time. Said our water was safe. I'm not stupid. So I haul my own. I drive 45 minutes to a little town called Rosedale. I hate getting water. The first thing I did when I got into my beautiful room, one of my most important thank yous for today and yesterday. Thank you, Courtney, for your incredible water. Whoa, is it delicious to drink? I drank and drank, and I had a bath. And I filled the tub like almost overflowing. I can't do that at home. That's not a lot of baths in there. So now I'm back home. It's an insult. I took a window apart. I unload where the rosebud, I have to look at that hideous thing. I lost my laundry storage room. Legal papers are served on the defendants, statute of limitations for that banishment letter. National News did a very short segment on me. It was really nothing. A whole bunch of other Albertans were in this show. They didn't get the visit. I got the visit. Here they come. This is my place. It's very beautiful at Rosebud. Here they come. And you know, they couldn't even make it up my driveway that kind of goes like this. They had to back down and try again. This is my yard. They sent the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Welcome to Canada. And I was taking pictures, and the big guy says, "You can't take our photograph, we're undercover." So you all have to go home tonight and write Mr. Harper a letter and tell him our RCMP need white, fuzzy outfits for wintertime. Funny, yes, but in seriousness, we must not give in. I don't believe in violence. I'm pretty shy. But I will not back down. So that just cost you your second helping. I looked them in the eye and said, "You, sirs, I believe in respect. I'm always as respectful as my temper can keep me." I was scared when they came. I was afraid for my files. Because we were preparing the because so many of the NGOs were trying to synergize me, and I was being betrayed by so many people, I went quiet. And I began preparing in secret what needed to be done for the lawsuit. But I looked him in the eye and said, "You're trespassing? I can take photos." And "No, you can't have my camera." That is what I believe in, not backing down. You said, "No, you go home if you don't like it." I had them call my lawyer too, because I wanted a phone record of their visit. And so he says, "Oh, I'll use my cell phone, save you the long distance." "No, thank you. You use my phone." And we asked if they had a warrant. They had no warrant. So if Bacteria did this, would they spend your good tax dollars sending people to try to scare me? I believe this was purely to intimidate me. I believe they were sent by Ancana. I believe they were sent to get me to drop my lawsuit. And then suddenly, I guess the intimidation didn't work. So Mr. Harper appoints Neil Whitman as Chief Justice of the Court of Queen's Bench. But he was a justice on the Court of Appeal. Is this a demotion? How important is it to maneuver this justice into where my lawsuit was going to go? Don't forget, the defendants had been served. We go public, and then the Duke study comes out that Andrew talked about. Now we've quantified the problem. And then the Harper government appoints Justice Veltois to Court of Queen's Bench. She became case management. I'll talk about her a little more. Here's Encana drilling under my land. This well, they went down vertical and then deviated right under the old Rosebud River and under my place, right in line with my already dangerously contaminated water well. They frack you, and they come and they frack you and frack you and frack you again. I wrote concerns. They didn't answer my questions. I said, what about the waste? The fish scale shales that reportedly, the shales in Alberta that Encana wants to frack now are radioactive. I have industry document that admits this. What will happen to the waste? Oh, says the ERCB, the regulator, don't worry, we will not dump it adjacent to your land. They went a mile over. A photographer from Victoria was visiting, and we were across the river, and we could see this blowing. It was a very windy day, and the people were coming out of the church in the hamlet of Rosebud, down in the valley. So we are breathing this. This is food land. We are eating this and drinking it. The waste is what I believe. The economics are going to kill this too, but I believe the waste is what's going to do this in. They are making so much waste, and they can't cope with it. They're breaking the law all over the place in North America trying to get rid of it. And Canada did a study at Suffield on some of the toxics. This is recycled frac fluid. This is drilling waste. Barium, arsenic, chromium, mercury, there's more, and that's not even the BTEX. I don't have time to go into it all. Their little document says, don't worry, we work it into the soil right away to prevent harmful effects. The ground was frozen. I went back a month later. I'm a scientist. I go, oh, you say that? Okay, let's see if you're telling the truth. No. So we have the first court hearing. And Justice Veltois offers volunteers to be case manager. She's the justice that was appointed by Harper to the Court of Queen's Bench. I agree to this. Just like in the movies, when this happened, my lead lawyer said, oh, well, milady, can we confer with our client? So you go into the little room in the back, like in the movies, and my lawyers are like this tall, and I'm getting claustrophobic because I need the prairie sky to breathe. And I said, let's agree. So Murray goes back and says, okay, milady, we'll give you a shorter statement of claim, but you know, you're going to ask for this stuff later on. We're just trying to save step in the process. Nope, that's not how we do it in Alberta. Well, in the Court of Appeal, just a couple weeks ago, the three justices were saying they wanted a trial right there. They wanted all our evidence. They wanted more information. Just like what Murray said 2 years earlier. Then a few months later, there's a case management call. Legally, my case belongs in Drumheller Court because the court cases belong where? Oh, I'm sorry.
Keep
You can just yell at me. I'm pretty easy.
Keep blocking the screen. You gotta stay where you are.
Oh, okay, sorry. Well, why didn't you speak up sooner?
Thinking about it.
I'm going to send you to the back of the room. You're fired. Gee whiz, you guys are too easy going. Are you single? Oh, okay. Does that mean I have to divorce my explosive contaminated water? Yeah. All right, so back to this hideous lawsuit. Legally, the case belongs in Drumheller. And in a case management call, the defendant said, we want it moved to Calgary, and Justice Veltois said, the chief says it belongs in Drumheller. And Canada's lawyers say, if it's in Drumheller, we're not driving there. This is their office in Drumheller. It's massive, and behind it, there's massive rows of trucks. And over here is the Synovus building, which is really just a little finger of Encana. So they won't drive to Drum. They move the case to Calgary, but they will come and keep fracking. They send all the frack crews. They drive out to Rosebud. This is a different well. This is more waste in the same field a year later. This is not compliant. Where's the regulator? Does anybody see him? Her? So we get draft regulations. This was just fluff. This was to make the Albertans were getting unruly. They were getting angry. Lots of people are being fracked in Alberta. There are rich, white people being fracked. Northwest of Calgary, they are being fracked to hell. And they've been so nicely synergized as they live there poisoned with their dying livestock and their hair falling out, they say, oh, but we're not opposed. That's how slick it works. I will not even go to a synergy meeting because it's brainwashing. And brainwashing works really well. So they come up with these regulations, but look at what they allow. They came into force last summer. They can do all this stuff up here still. They can do shallow horizontal shales. They can do these without any baseline water well testing. They only do testing for shallow cobalt methane wells. And they keep coming. This is another well. More waste. Another court hearing. We have not yet got to trial. This is just pre-trial motions to get my case kicked out. The courtroom is packed, and Canada argues nothing. We were all stunned. And there's a rig 400 meters from my water well. Another one. Another one above the basic groundwater protection. Carpet bombing. That's what industry calls it. The regulator argued that I'm a terrorist, so they can violate my rights. No duty of care for Albertans or groundwater. Completely legally immune even for bad faith acts, negligence, you name it. Alberta Environment argued to have the word contamination struck from my claim and mention of the other contaminated water wells in my community. I was not even at my own court hearing. Again, I do not back down. I'm not an activist, I'm not a protester, but I believe in taking a stand. I had no poster. I had nothing on my truck, nothing in my truck but my little dog. I took a witness, a PhD. I wanted good science watching this. And we spent the day in the waiting room of the Drumheller courthouse, and I went to the front desk, I told the clerks, I asked permission. I said, she said, aren't you Arts in St. Canada? Yes, I said. Aren't you supposed to be West and no, I'm supposed to be here, right? She goes, oh. So I said, I'm here because it's supposed to be here, the hearing, right? Legally, yeah. So I said, do you mind if we sit here and attend the hearing where it's supposed to be? Now and I asked my lawyers to read my statement to them into the court. And I told nobody for weeks before, for months before. I was very nervous to do this. This is not me. I'm really shy. I didn't sleep. I would have my little dog on the couch just freak out because I was going to do this and I knew I had to do it. So my lead lawyer did read it into the court, and because I told one journalist the day before and one trusted person. There are a few in Alberta. I found one because of the fracking, and everyone in the court was going, banana, 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 where's Jess, where's Jess, where's Jess, where's Jess? That's the guy I wanted to go on the date with. But the reason I think my statement got read into the court was because everybody wanted to know where I was, because nobody knew. And the defendants and even the justice leaned forward. Where is she? That should not have been allowed, but it's in the transcripts. We can use our imaginations all alone, individually. Yeah, get a witness. You don't need, we have it all. Imagination, heart, pride, fierce loyalty to family or community or trees, whatever. We can do so much. And the best thing about how absolutely terrible things are in the world right now is it's making people realize what we have let be taken away from us. Last night, every time I'm on the road, my process in a hotel room, I turn out the lights, I try to sleep. I don't sleep very well because I'm so stressed about these kind of things. And there's a red light over there, and a green light over there, and another light over an orange one, and oh man, turn the light on, go find them all, turn them off, put a towel on the TV, I try to unplug the fridge, unplug the microwave, then there's another little gadget, I don't even know what it is, this hotel had a green light on the hairdryer. So I had to go into the bathroom and unplug the hairdryer. But all those little lights use electricity. Why are we wasting so much energy? Because wasting energy is the only way these companies are making their big profits and getting away with synergizing us all and breaking the law. At home, I unplug almost everything all the time. So then Harper, you heard about this in the intro, yanks the judge. And I emailed my lawyers panicking, this is bad. And they said, no, just don't worry because she will rule, even if she's promoted to the Court of Appeal. So now look at what we've had happen with our Prime Minister. Justice Whitman could just have stayed at the Court of Appeal. No, the year earlier, or a couple years, he moves him from Court of Appeal to the Court of Queen's Bench and takes this justice and puts her on the Court of Appeal. And in our case management call, she says, no, I will not rule, not an option. My lawyers were shocked. And then in the next case management, or in that case management call, we are told that the Chief Justice that Prime Minister Harper had put into position a few years earlier volunteered to take my case over. I'm trapped. That's okay. You know, this is a really terrible story, but you know what's so fantastic about this story? The world is watching. Canadians are slowly catching on, but the world is watching. And it does not matter if I win or lose. It does not matter what they do to me next. Because just like Ingmar, I will die for this lawsuit, and it is the doing that is the victory. If we anticipate the end result, we'll do nothing. If I were to look at the end result of this lawsuit, I wouldn't do it. I'm doing it because they tried to silence me for years and scare me and intimidate me and trespass all my property. And I am doing it anyways. And I'm here today doing it anyways. That cost you dessert. I get to take it all home. I'm still hauling water. This is last fall. And Canada filed a statement of defense, and they say, oh, no, we don't frack. We stimulate. But their own data, this is their data. Fractured. So they hired Tinkerbell to do a little help. And finally, months later, Chief Justice rules on a hearing he did not hear. Yes, he read the transcripts, but he did not hear the hearing. He did not look you in the eye. That packed courtroom. He did not look the women in the eye who suffer the most when water goes bad. Who has to walk the furthest to get the family's water? It's not the men that don't ask me out. It's the women. So he says in his ruling, however, that they judged me as a terrorist without any evidence, but he gives them complete legal immunity even for violating the charter rights, or charter. That is everybody's. He's basically saying, he's setting precedent, like the case that Maud mentioned in Newfoundland, a terrible, terrible legal precedent. Our Prime Minister couldn't even fight for the people there and say, we're taking this all away. He's got way more money and power than me. So, he gives them legal immunity. That means, can anyone see what this means? What does this mean for you? They can walk over us. They can violate our charter rights, Canada's supreme law, and get away with it. I will not let that happen. And he says I have a valid charter claim, but as you already heard in the intro, I don't know what charter clothes look like, but this looked really good to me. Contamination, however, stays in my claim, and the other mention of the other contaminated water wells. I'm still hauling water. This is a very quick little bit of science and math. This is the data I told you about before oil and gas. This is after oil and gas, but before the brute force fracking, vertical, deviated, horizontal, deep horizontal, shallow horizontal, shales, sands, coal bed methane. And because the fracks go out of zone all the time, they're fracking everything. This is some test data the regulator did on coal bed methane wells. 12% methane, but they did this after the coal bed methane started. This is baseline testing data, but years after the coal bed methane fracking, where the freshwater zones are started. This is 150 Alberta monitoring water wells. Gas in water wells in Alberta. This is not good science, I'll admit that, because these are different studies. different sets of data. It's very hard to get data in Alberta. But this shows to me a very scary trend. A manager with Alberta Environments was in a meeting with another landowner in Alberta with contaminated water. He brought it up, 2 witnesses, there were transcripts. He was not asked. And he was talking about Albertans asking for help from fracking. Apparently where they're fracking, the white, rich people northwest of Calgary, there's a backlog of 400 complaints. And he said, ha ha ha, these people will get nowhere. That's you too. Everybody copies the Alberta model because it works so well for the companies. These people will get nowhere. He's talking about me. He, he, he. So, 3 years of motions now. These motions are done to bankrupt me, drag it out, get me to give up, kill my heart, kill my spirit. And now the government, the Justice Whitman, gave this to them. My lawyers say this is abuse of process. Now they weren't allowed to strike the word contamination. Now they want to strike my whole case. It's expensive to fly lawyers out from Toronto. I couldn't find lawyers in Alberta. Well, I did, but they betrayed me too. No duty of care. They're copying the immunity. They're copying what the justice gave the ERCB. It was an incredible hearing. I sat right behind the Crown Counsel. There were more than 40 people in the room. I started crying 3 times in the hearing because I was 2 things. I was so stunned by the number of people now supporting me. Many people from Rosebud were there. Many people from Rosebud were in Calgary last year. I never thought I would see that ever. The other thing was, none of the people close to me were there. Nobody. It's very, very hard to do this alone. It is very scary, but I know the power, our power, escalates when we do these impossible things alone. Yes, I get donations, and they have been extremely gratefully accepted. And sadly, environmental groups in this country have been using me, my work, my decade of research, and my lawsuit to rake in donations for them. So it's a painful place. But regardless of the donations, I plan to do this lawsuit all the way. I will sell everything I have. And my lawyers and I do. I'm very careful with money. I live really frugally, and now even more frugal than ever. I've saved all my life, never knew why, obviously for this lawsuit. But I have enough alone to go all the way. It is worth it to give it all up. My paradise on the high plains of Alberta. And the Crown Counsel says this quote, "This needs to be spread everywhere." He wants my case thrown out, he tells the judge, because if he allows my case, there could be millions or billions.
Too big to fail.
But that's a lot of contamination. That they're admitting to, exactly. Would you like to go on the road with me? Sure. Excellent. You could keep me from moving into them. I really like being on the same level as you guys, but I'm not used to this kind of a setup. Like normally you're, above the projector. So, and then April 30th, 2014. Anybody know what this is? Yeah. This is a con job. I'm a scientist. This is probably the most disrespectful I'm going to get in my talk. I am horrified by this thing. Oh, we know nothing. Let's go frack Canada slowly. It's synergy using high-named scientists. I have been horrified by the lack of support from the science community with what I've been doing and my peers. A couple geologists helped me. They found the data proving in canifract the aquifers. I didn't. They sent it to me. But most of my peers in the science world shun me. What am I doing wrong? Telling the truth. But this report, this is god-awful. And Dr. John Sherry, anybody recognize that name? Remember 2002, 12 years ago? And Ted Morton. Who knows about Ted Morton? Failed candidate, he got punted. Yo, out of here. And why? The people in his riding were getting heavily fracked, the rich white people. And they demanded a moratorium and he refused. Lots of other reasons too. So what basically this massive report, I don't know how many 100 pages, you don't have to read it. It does have good new information, but it's missing the most important information in my opinion. They provide more questions than answers, and they basically say, let us study them. Let us study the air, the water, the watershed, the people, the communities. We'll study them as we go slow and frack them all. So this is a guinea pig. I love guinea pigs. Wink, 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 wink. Well, how are we going to, who's going to build us armor? Who's going to build the armor to protect us from the air, the food, the water, the destruction of the roads? And in this report, the new report, Dr. John Sherry was the chair. He wrote chapter 4. He completely ignored it in the new report. They already studied all this stuff. He could have said to Mr. Peter Kent, he was honorable, he was Minister of Environment at the time, yo, John, we want to do a study to calm down the Canadian masses. They're getting rebellious with this fracking stuff. Too many people's hair's falling out, cattle are dying, the water's on fire. We got to tone it all down. Okay, yeah, we'll do a review. Why didn't he say, but Peter, we already did a review 12 years ago. Use that, and we'll update it. We'll do an update to that report and add the new research that shows how bad fracking is. I read you that already. Lack of enforcement. Most areas of Canada. No strong incentive. This was 2002. Dr. John Sherry wrote this chapter. 12 years later. This reminds me of the dog chasing his tail, the synergy symbol. Round and round and round we go. Keep them all talking while we frack the communities while they're so busy talking they won't notice. I want to go south to Louisiana. They're saying no. Oil-soaked Louisiana. Oil-soaked Santa Cruz, California voted unanimously no. The Senate Appropriations Committee just yesterday voted 4-2 to ban fracking in a moratorium for fracking in the state. Still has to go to the Senate. You can bet there's going to be some big oil money spreading around there. That'll happen soon. Corporate science lies. No! Why are Canadians so afraid of saying no? Use your imaginations to help other people. One of the reasons I dislike the term fractivist or activist is because the people that we need to wake up, that are very shy, like me, and conservative, careful, they don't want to be shunned like me in their communities. They're not saying anything or they haven't made up their decision. And when they see headlines that says fractivist this, they don't read it. Industry loves those terms. They use them to divide. I'm sorry, I know many people are hung on those terms. I think we need to drop those terms. And what do they make down there? Looks good, doesn't it? Beer. With water. Do you want to come on the road with me too? Water. We have to think about, oops, sorry. You can, yeah, that's great. So now we just, appeal hearing, I'm pretty well done. There's way too much to tell you guys all, but what my heart broke, my heart's taken a lot of beatings in the last decade. When the justices walked in, the Chief Justice, Catherine Ann Fraser, was supposed to hear the hearing, which I was stunned at. And instead of her, 3 white elderly men walked in. And somebody said earlier today, rape culture. And I sat there thinking, they don't walk 4 miles to get water when any kind of an Aboriginal woman's family, her water supply has been fracked. It was awful. They asked the most stupid questions. They said, oh, well, we have all the paperwork, so we're gonna go bigger picture. I thought I was like back in college days when You know, us new students, we were trying to be impressive and intellectualize and talk philosophy, and we knew nothing about what we were talking about, sounding really stupid in the coffee shop at the university center. That's what they sounded like. And I mean no disrespect to the Chief Justice, to the justices. This is the Alberta Court of Appeal. We're appealing Justice Whitman's decision on saying you can violate her charter rights with immunity. It's terrifying to me. Now, neither one of those hearings, we don't know what the rulings will be. We don't know how long it'll take. Some of the biggest stress in this case is the waiting. I want to thank you very much. Lunch is almost ready, and I want to do my dedication to water, children everywhere, mothers and fathers and grandparents and great-grandparents. My grandparents would be horrified to see what I'm doing with my life. Aunts and uncles, I don't have kids. Your kids are my kids. Your grandkids are my grandkids. I'm only an aunt. But it's all of us. It is ordinary people, communities, friends, and yes, the breweries. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, it's almost lunchtime, except I need Tina to come up here for a minute with Maud, because it happens to be somebody's birthday today. And we could do the usual happy birthday to you, but this is Tina Filipino, who runs the Let's Sing choir here. And we're going to do a community version, so we're going to, I think, well, we'll leave it to Tina to tell us what we're going to do. When we're done, you should see this cake.
All right, so there's happy birthday, happy birthday. We're in love with you, in love with you. Happy birthday, happy birthday. May your dreams come true, your dreams come true. May happiness be here throughout the coming year, and may you never, never be blue. Woo-hoo! Happy birthday, happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. So happy birthday, happy birthday. We're in love with you, in love with you. Dreams come true. Happy birthday, happy birthday. May your dreams come true. Your dreams, may happiness be near, may happiness be here throughout the coming year, and may you never, never be blue. Woo-hoo! Happy birthday, happy birthday, happy birthday to you.
And be careful what you wish for.
You should face us. Go around the other side. Oh, thanks. Damien won. Thank you. Okay, you can blow it.
Right on. Okay, it's time for us to have lunch, and we'll see if we can have a nice